The sacred ancestor clone that's ruling over the devilish army outside has never shown itself, so we don't know much about its powers and abilities. However, according to the information we've managed to gather, it should be no more powerful than the clone that you were pursued by. These two clones both stem from that sacred ancestor Zhu Guang, so even if there are some disparities between their abilities, they should all be somewhat connected. Having faced a clone of sacred ancestor Zhu Guang already, it should be easier for you to face this clone compared to clones of other sacred ancestors, the white-robed elderly man said. Oh, are you planning to get me to face this sacred ancestor clone, Brother Gu? Han Li asked in a calm manner, seemingly unsurprised by this arrangement. Indeed, fellow Taoist Han. Under normal circumstances, I definitely wouldn't ask you to take such a huge risk, but the devilish army outside is extremely powerful, and just the number of devilish lords in the army alone is almost twice the number of elders in the city. The other elders and I have racked our brains to try and come up with a strategy, but the sacred ancestor clone is going to be more powerful than even the average late-body integration cultivator. There really is no good way for us to counter it. If it were to force its way through a weak point in the city's defenses and allow the devilish army to storm into the city, we would be in a dire situation, the white-robed elderly man replied. Han Li was silent for a moment before suddenly asking, how was the panel of elders initially planning to address this sacred ancestor clone? Don't tell me you had no plans at all. What plans could we have other than to rely on our advantage in numbers and our restrictions? Our initial plan was that once the battle commenced, we would send someone to lure the clone into a formation that we had prepared in advance, then trap him in the formation. We wouldn't be able to kill it that way, but at the very least, we'd be able to keep it out of the battle for a while. Unfortunately, the plan sounds simple, but it's actually very difficult to execute, so the chances of success are not very high, Buddhist monk Jin Yue explained. Letter 1D4F, letter 1D667, letter 1D4E, letter 1D4E, letter 1D498, letter 1D4E, letter 1D486, letter 1D4EC, letter 1D4F8, letter 1D4AT. Indeed, all of the sacred ancestor clones are extremely cunning. Luring one into a formation certainly wouldn't be an easy task, Han Li replied with a solemn nod. That's right. Fellow Taoist Jin and I had planned to ask you to lure the sacred ancestor clone into the formation, but with your past cultivation base, the plan was too risky for you, so we didn't propose it to you. However, now that you've progressed to the late-body integration stage, there's no need for such concerns. We're not asking you to defeat the sacred ancestor clone, Brother Han. All that we ask is that you keep it occupied once the battle begins so it can't attack the city's restrictions. As for the devilish army and devilish lords, our panel of elders will face them. The survival of the city is at stake here, so please don't turn us down, Brother Han, the white-robed elderly man said in an earnest manner. Han Li pondered this for a moment before replying with a smile. I agreed to do everything in my power to help the city ward off the devilish army, and I'm certainly not going to eat my words. If all I need to do is hold off the sacred ancestor clone, then that should be within my capabilities. Leave the Zhu Guang clone to me. The white-robed elderly man was ecstatic to hear this. Thank you for being so selfless, Brother Han. If we can ward off the devilish army, we'll definitely reward you handsomely for your efforts. It's all right, I'm just doing what's expected of me. The fate of the entire human race hinges on this battle, so I'll naturally be giving it my all. If that's everything that needs to be discussed, then I'll be taking my leave now. I only recently completed my breakthrough and still need to consolidate my cultivation base, Han Li said as he rose to his feet. The white-robed elderly man and Buddhist monk Jin Yue were rather surprised by this, but there was no reason for them to keep Han Li any longer, so they accompanied him out of the hall. Following Han Li's departure, Buddhist monk Jin Yue's smile faded, and he asked, Brother Gu, why didn't you try to recruit fellow Taoist Han to join our city? That was a great opportunity just now. Do you think there's any point in doing so? I was holding on to some hope, but as soon as I saw fellow Taoist Han today, I knew that there was no way he would agree to join any power. With his current powers, how do you think he ranks among all of the late-body integration cultivators of our two races? The white-robed elderly man asked. Buddhist monk Jin Yue's heart stirred upon hearing this, and only after pondering the question for a long while did he reply, I've met all of the late-body integration stage fellow Taoists of our two races, but none of them have been unfathomable to me as fellow Taoist Han was. On top of that, he slew multiple devilish lords at the mid-body integration stage, and even faced a sacred ancestor clone. Judging from all that, I would speculate that fellow Taoist Han is already the most powerful being among our two races aside from Senior Mo and Senior Ao. There you go. With fellow Taoist Han's powers, why would he bind himself to any power for no reason? Also, what can our deep heaven city offer to tempt someone of his powers? I would only risk offending fellow Taoist Han by trying to recruit him to join our city again, so I naturally decided against it, the white-robed elderly man said with a wry smile. That's true. It's incredible to think that someone who was an ordinary guard of our city less than 2,000 years ago has since surpassed us on the path to pursuing the great Tao, Buddhist monk Jin Yue sighed in a slightly wistful manner. Life is always unpredictable. All right, this isn't the time for us to be discussing something like this. Let's continue where we left off before. I still think that we should set up those powerful treasures atop the city wall to repress those low-grade devilish beasts, the white-haired elderly man said in a serious manner. However, Buddhist monk Jin Yue immediately shook his head in response. Those treasures are trump cards that we refined after expending extensive painstaking efforts. We can't use them on devilish beasts. Once we expose them, the devilish army will know what to expect, and their potency will be greatly hampered. But there are simply too many low-grade devilish beasts if we don't use them. Thus, the two of them began to debate the topic in the hall. Han Li was naturally completely unaware of this, and he immediately flew back to his own abode. He would have to expend quite a bit of time to truly consolidate his late body integration stage cultivation base, so the more time he had to cultivate prior to the commencement of the battle, the more he would be able to consolidate his powers. Furthermore, after reaching the late body integration stage, he was close to attaining full mastery of his provenance true devil arts, and there were also some powerful abilities that he would finally be able to unleash. However, if he wanted to use these abilities in battle, then he would have to take some time to familiarize himself with them first. Thus, he had immediately chosen to depart after his conversation with the two elders. After returning to his abode, Han Li issues a few instructions to Qi Lingzi and the others before entering his secret chamber again. He sat down with his legs crossed on the futon at the center of the secret chamber, but instead of going into a meditative state, he flipped a hand over to produce a pair of thumb-sized white jade badges that were covered in silver runes. These were none other than the two outer pages of the golden jade tome that Han Li had obtained back in the human world. One of the pages contained the refinement method for several types of profound talismans, while the other contained the 100 meridian refinement mantra. The pages weren't complete, but through his own research, Han Li had managed to refine most of the talismans. Now, there was only a heavenly halberd talisman that he was still yet to refine. This was the final talisman recorded on the outer page, and it was also the only offensive talisman. Apparently, it was incredibly powerful, but unfortunately, it was several times more difficult to study this talisman than the previous ones. If it weren't for the fact that Han Li had encountered many talisman masters of foreign races and exchanged a lot of ideas and experiences with them, it would be virtually impossible for him to refine this talisman. Han Li had already mastered the refinement method long ago, but the materials required were quite difficult to find, and there was also an astonishing demand on the level of magic power of the person refining the talisman. Back when Han Li was at the mid-body integration stage, he didn't possess enough magic power to refine this heavenly halberd talisman, and that had been very frustrating to him. However, it did make sense. Considering how fearsome the description of this talisman made it out to be, it was most likely quite a renowned talisman even in the true immortal realm, so it was only normal that beings of lower realms like himself would find it extremely difficult to refine such a talisman. Thankfully, he had assigned the task of gathering materials to his disciples, and they had managed to gather all of the materials over the past several centuries. Now that he was at the late body integration stage, he possessed sufficient magic power to support the refinement of this talisman, so he was planning to refine it during this period of seclusion. As for the 100 meridian refinement mantra enclosed in the other outer page, that was a body refinement method of the true immortal realm that allowed one to refine their physical body like a treasure. Unfortunately, this secret technique had extremely high demands on one's physical body. Han Li had only been able to just barely cultivate some of the secret technique after cleverly refining the extreme essence-effused mountain and then some other treasures to become a part of his body. However, this wasn't sustainable, and at his current cultivation base, the enhancements brought to his body by those treasures were no longer sufficient to satisfy him. Thus, He was planning to pick up the 100 Meridian Refinement mantra again and truly cultivate it this time. With his current physical constitution, he would naturally be able to cultivate this secret technique without any issues. However, this immortal secret technique would definitely take a very long time to cultivate, and it wasn't something that would yield any benefits for him in a short time, so he wasn't planning to make a start on it right away. Han Li injected his spiritual sense into the two outer pages and carefully reviewed their contents for a while, and after ascertaining that there weren't any issues, he stowed them away before slowly closing his eyes. He was going to get himself into prime condition before he began refining that heavenly halberd talisman. With that talisman up his sleeve, he should be able to ensure self-preservation no matter what mishaps arose in the upcoming battle. Of course, this wasn't the only thing that Han Li was going to be relying on against that Zhu Guang clone. With his current enormous wealth of spiritual sense, he would be able to just barely control all of his unevolved gold-devouring beetles in battle. If he were to release several thousand mature gold-devouring beetles at once, they would pose a substantial threat even to the Zhu Guang clone. Furthermore, he was preparing to practice the abilities enclosed in the Provenance True Devil Arts right away, and all of these abilities were extremely powerful. On top of that, he had his leopard Kirin beast and purple-striped gold-devouring beetles to assist him. With all of that up his sleeve, he should be able to ensure self-preservation even against the true body of a sacred ancestor, let alone a mere sacred ancestor clone. With that in mind, Han Li gradually relaxed and entered a meditative state. A period of silence ensued in the secret chamber, following which a low buzzing abruptly rang out, accompanied by the occasional resounding boom. Half a month later, an ear-piercing ringing sound erupted within the secret chamber, and a golden pillar of light rose to the ceiling of the secret chamber, then appeared at the top of the stone pagoda right above Han Li. The golden pillar of light was over around 10,000 feet tall and as thick as a water tank. There was a giant halberd projection hovering above the pillar of light, and it was emitting an astonishing ringing sound. Furthermore, there were thousands of shimmering silver runes dancing around the halberd projection, creating a mystical sight to behold. In the next instant, the sharp ringing sound erupting from the halberd projection abruptly ceased, and at the same time, a burst of indescribably terrifying fluctuations surged forth in all directions. As the fluctuations swept through the air, specks of golden light began to appear out of thin air. These specks of light were only the size of grains of rice, but there were far too many of them to count, and they were surging toward the pillar of light in a frenzy. Every speck of light was emanating extremely pure metal attribute spiritual chi, and all of the metal attribute spiritual chi in a radius of tens of thousands of kilometers was being drawn to the pillar of light. On top of that, the metal attribute armor and treasures being carried by the patrolling guards and other cultivators in the area also began to release their metal attribute spiritual chi, all of which surged toward the golden pillar as specks of golden light. These cultivators were naturally quite startled by this, and they immediately tried to prevent their treasures from leaking spiritual chi, but no matter what they tried, their efforts proved to be futile. Within mere moments, close to half of the metal attribute spiritual chi in their treasures had been lost, and the light emanating from them dimmed significantly. It was quite clear that if things were to continue like this, these treasures would soon be reduced to useless pieces of scrap metal. All of the nearby cultivators were petrified to see this, but they could only look on in helplessness and despair. Just as the situation was truly about to get out of hand, the halberd projection suddenly shuddered, and all of the fluctuations it was releasing abruptly ceased. The giant pillar of light then vanished on the spot, and at the same time, the leakage of metal attribute spiritual chi from the treasures in the surrounding area was also cut off. If it weren't for the fact that the auras of these treasures had become extremely feeble, the cultivators in the area could easily be led into thinking that they had just experienced a hallucination. Many people began to exchange bewildered glances with one another. Of course, it was soon determined that the phenomenon that had just taken place had stemmed from Han Li's abode. Everyone naturally came to the conclusion that Han Li had been refining a certain treasure that required an enormous influx of metal attribute spiritual chi, and they certainly didn't dare to demand compensation from a late body integration stage senior, so they could only lament their ill fortune. None of the elders of the city witnessed this phenomenon, but they received news of it shortly thereafter. They were rather surprised to hear about this, but didn't think much of it, and they didn't even send anyone to inquire Han Eli about what had happened. At this point, the devilish army was becoming more and more active, and it was quite apparent to all cultivators of Deep Heaven City that a battle was imminent. Under these circumstances, the high-grade cultivators in the city naturally weren't going to concern themselves with something trivial like this. 2 months later, Han Li was seated in his secret chamber with golden light shimmering from his body. His eyes were tightly shut, and his hands were clasped in front of his chest with a golden and silver talisman held between them. Above his head was a projection with 3 heads and 6 arms that was hovering at a low altitude. The projection's 3 faces were identical to Han Li's, and they each wore a different expression. Hovering above the 6 outstretched hands of the projection were 6 golden treasures of different description, all of which seemed to be substantial objects with intricate silver runes inscribed all over them. These treasures were all releasing different phenomena, and it was quite clear that not only were they extremely powerful, they also possessed vastly different abilities. All of a sudden, Han Li's expression stirred slightly, and the golden and silver talisman abruptly disappeared from between his hands as he opened his eyes. Almost at the exact same moment, the golden projection also vanished into his body. A ball of red light then shot forth into the secret chamber before landing in Han Li's grasp. Han Li's eyes narrowed slightly as he appraised the ball of red light, then suddenly released his spiritual sense out of the secret chamber. His enormous spiritual sense instantly swept through all of the levels of the stone pagoda before stopping in the hall on the top floor. Seeing as she's come here in person, the devilish army must have already begun attacking the city. Otherwise, she wouldn't disrupt my seclusion for no good reason, Han Li murmured to himself as a solemn look appeared on his face. He waved a hand through to snuff out the ball of red light, then rose to his feet and flew out of the secret chamber as a streak of azure light. On the top floor of the stone pagoda, a silver-robed woman was waiting for him with a concerned look on her face. Qilingzi, Hai Yueshan, and the Ice Phoenix were standing nearby in a respectful manner. This woman was none other than Fairy Silver Light, and her brows were currently tightly furrowed. Rest assured, Senior, I've already sent a voice transmission talisman to Master, so he should be here soon, Qilingzi reassured. Fairy Silver Light nodded in response. The devilish army has already begun to advance toward our Deep Heaven City, and an all-out battle is imminent, so it would be best if Brother Han can meet up with the elders of the city as soon as possible. You 3 can come with Brother Han as well. The elders will make sure not to send you out to battle too early, so you should have a greater chance of survival than the average cultivator. Thank you, Senior. Hai Yueshan and Qilingzi immediately expressed their gratitude, and a grateful look also appeared on the Ice Phoenix's face. Right at this moment, azure light flashed within the hall, and a humanoid figure suddenly appeared without any warning. Has the devilish army commenced their attack, fellow Taoist? This isn't just another harassment attack, is it? Han Li asked in a calm manner as soon as he appeared in the room. It's good to see you, Brother Han. The devilish army is indeed about to begin attacking the city, and they've deployed all of their devilish beasts and troops, so this definitely isn't just a harassment attack. Even that sacred ancestor Zhu Guang clone seems to have appeared in the devilish army. I can see that your powers have received another significant boost as a result of your breakthrough, Brother Han. I can't even ascertain your exact cultivation base anymore, Fairy Silver Light said with an elated look on her face. Seeing as the situation is so urgent, I'll meet up with Brother Gu and the others right away. You can all come with me as well, Han Li said with a smile as he turned to his disciples and the Ice Phoenix. The 3 of them naturally agreed, and thus all of them immediately departed from the stone pagoda together, heading directly toward the direction that the devilish army was situated in. After flying for a short while, the gigantic city wall of Deep Heaven City appeared in the distance, and there was an enormous palace that resembled an island hovering in midair just behind the city wall. Han Li and the others flew toward the palace before landing on a massive platform in front of it, and there were already thousands of high-grade cultivators gathered on the scene. At the center of the platform was a stone pagoda that was over 1,000 feet tall, at the top of which stood several people. They were none other than the members of the panel of elders. Han Li naturally had no intention of hanging around with the ordinary cultivators, and he issued a few instructions to his disciples and the Ice Phoenix before flying toward the pagoda with Fairy Silver Light. The white-robed elderly man was ecstatic to see Han Li, and he immediately pointed toward the devilish army outside the city as he said, "Welcome, fellow Taoist Han. Take a look over there. That should be the clone of sacred ancestor Zhu Guang. And Li cast his gaze toward the same direction, and blue light flashed through his eyes, allowing him to see the devilish army with an extremely high level of clarity, even though it was situated several tens of kilometers away. Mid the countless devilish battle arcs, there was a giant pyramid, at the tip of which stood a group of extremely eye-catching crimson-armored high-grade devilish beings. They were gathered around a giant carriage that was drawn by several devilish beasts, each with 5 lion heads, a layer of deep blue scales all over their bodies, and a long scorpion-like stinger extending behind each of them. The carriage itself was extremely intricate in design, with an inky black flag situated at its center, upon which were inscribed several large crimson devilish characters. Beneath the flag were clouds of churning devilish chi, within which stood a young man in a crimson suit of armor, with 7 or 8 devilish lords standing on either side of him in a respectful manner. The young man bore an identical appearance to the 3 sacred ancestor Zhu Guang clones who had pursued Han Li, and a hint of killing intent flashed through Han Li's eyes at the sight of him. The crimson-robed young man seemed to have immediately sensed something, and he turned to meet the gaze of Han Li's spirit eyes. His crimson pupils then instantly turned as black as ink, releasing a burst of bone-chilling suction force that attempted to forcibly draw in Han Li's gaze. Han Li's heart stirred as he forcibly cut off their eye contact with his immense spiritual sense, and the crimson-robed young man's expression changed slightly in response to this. "Did you discover something, fellow Taoist Zhu Guang?" A lazy voice rang out from the other side of the beast-drawn carriage. The owner of the voice was a burly bronze-skinned man wearing a beast-hide garment. It was none other than the man whom Zhu Guang had referred to as the #1 devilish lord. He currently had his arms crossed, and was leaning against the railing on the beast-drawn carriage in a lackadaisical manner. "A human cultivator was spying on us, but I startled him away. However, they were able to easily break free from my blacklight devilish eyes, so they're definitely no ordinary being," Zhu Guang replied. "Oh, they were able to resist your devilish eyes. Could this be the target you want me to deal with, or perhaps that new late-body integration stage being?" the burly man asked as an excited look appeared on his face. "It's hard to say. In any case, this is definitely going to be a troublesome opponent. If you encounter them, I would suggest you take extra caution," Zhu Guang said as his brows furrowed slightly. "Haha, rest assured, all I'm concerned about is that this opponent won't be powerful enough to put up a good fight," the burly man chortled. Zhu Guang could only shake his head with a wry smile in response. Meanwhile, over at Deep Heaven City, Han Li had his eyes tightly shut, and only after a long while did he manage to recover from the sense of dizziness he had been struck by. "Are you all right, fellow Taoist Han?" the white-robed elderly man asked in a concerned manner. "I'm fine. I was caught off guard by an opposing secret technique, but I'm all right now," Han Li replied with a nonchalant shake of his head. "That's good to hear. Have you managed to confirm if that man truly is the sacred ancestor Zhu Guang clone?" the white-robed elderly man asked. "I have. That man has an identical appearance and aura to the sacred ancestor Zhu Guang clones I've seen in the past, so he should be one as well," Han Li replied. "I see. The fact that this clone has appeared in the devilish army reaffirms the notion that they're planning to launch an all-out attack. We'll be counting on you to take on that clone, fellow Taoist Han. There's no need to defeat him. All you have to do is keep him occupied," Buddhist monk Jin Yue said with a solemn expression. Rest assured, fellow Taoists. As long as no other devilish beings intervene, this clone definitely won't be able to affect the rest of the battle," Han Li said with a confident smile. "We'll be counting on you then, Brother Han. We'll do our best to hold off all of the other devilish lords so they don't disrupt your battle," the white-robed elderly man assured in an elated manner. Han Li nodded and offered no response to this. After that, several of the elders that Han Li had met in the past all approached him with greetings, and they were clearly treating him more politely than they had in the past. Letter 1D4F, letter 1D4FB, letter 1D4E, letter 1D65A, letter 1D66C, letter 1D4E, letter 1D48F, letter 1D484, letter 1D490, letter 1D4F6. It was quite clear that his status as a late-body integration cultivator had earned him some awe and veneration from the elders of the city. And Li wasn't very familiar with these other members of the panel of elders, so he only exchanged some obligatory pleasantries with them before falling silent again. Right at this moment, a burst of loud rumbling rang out from the devilish army, following which hordes of ferocious devilish beasts rushed out of the sea of devilish chi. There were millions of devilish beasts with too many species among them to count. The devilish beasts rushed forward like a torrential flood, following which over 100 balls of black light flew out from among their ranks. Each ball of light contained a half-beast, half-human metamorphosis stage devilish beast, and under their instructions, the chaotic hordes of beasts instantly became neat and organized. Aside from the occasional low, beastly snarl, no other sound rang out from among them. Aside from these ordinary devilish beasts, there were over 1,000 extremely eye-catching mountainous super devilish beasts dispersed throughout the hordes of beasts. There was no end in sight to this army of devilish beasts, and more of them continued to emerge from within the sea of devilish chi, as if there were truly no end to their numbers. In what seemed like the blink of an eye, over 10 million devilish beasts had appeared, and the elders' expressions were becoming progressively more strained. How could there be so many devilish beasts? Wasn't there only supposed to be 5 million to 6 million? Elder Gu asked with a hint of alarm in his eyes. According to the information we had received earlier, there were indeed only supposed to be several million devilish beasts. These must be new additions to the devilish army, Buddhist monk Jin Yue explained in a calm manner. With so many devilish beasts present, this battle is not going to be an easy one, a black-robed demonic man murmured with a dark expression. Rest assured, fellow Taoists, these are only low-grade devilish beasts. No matter how many of them there are, they're not going to have a decisive effect on the battle. I had already considered such a potential situation in advance and prepared countermeasures accordingly, the white-robed elderly man said. I see. In that case, we'll leave it to you, Brother Gu. The other elders were quite relieved to hear this. The white-robed elderly man smiled as he flipped a hand over to summon a white formation plate, then said something into it, and moments later, bursts of astonishing energy fluctuations abruptly erupted as several giant formations emerged on the city wall. At the center of each formation hovered an altar that was as white as jade, and there were several ordinary-looking items situated on these altars. There was a dark blue bowl, an inky black gourd, a silver longsword, and a white screen-like object. Those are the 4 celestial river treasures. Isn't it overkill to be using them on low-grade devilish beings, Brother Gu? A demonic elder asked with a mixture of elation and concern on his face. These treasures are indeed extremely powerful, but their forte lies in their ability to attack massive areas. In comparison, they'll be much less effective when targeting individual powerful beings. As such, following some discussion with fellow Taoist Jin Yue, we decided to use them against these low-grade devilish beasts in the end. On one hand, we'll be able to kill a massive number of devilish beasts, and on the other hand, morale will be boosted. Otherwise, if we suffer a large number of casualties as soon as the battle begins, morale will inevitably plummet. I'm sure this is also the reasoning behind the devilish army's decision to send out all of these devilish beasts first, the white-robed elderly man explained. The other elders all felt this to be quite reasonable, so they nodded in response and didn't pry any further into the matter. There is indeed a massive number of devilish beasts, but the most troublesome beings to take care of will be those devilish elites. They seem to have been deployed as well, Han Li suddenly said. All of the elders hurriedly cast their eyes into the distance upon hearing this, and they discovered that groups of armor-clad devilish beings had appeared behind the hordes of beasts in the distance. These devilish beings were either riding atop different types of devilish steeds or flying through the air as gusts of black winds. They were all giving off a ruthless aura of bloodlust and following along silently behind the army of devilish beasts. If it weren't for Han Li's words of caution, the other elders wouldn't have noticed them. Amid the sound of rumbling war drums, a string of giant bell tolls suddenly erupted from within the sea of devilish chi, and the inky black giant arcs, as well as the enormous devilish pyramid, also emerged with countless devilish battle carriages around them. Have they gone insane? They're unleashing all of their power from the get-go. Are they not planning to keep any backup reserves? The white-robed elderly man exclaimed upon seeing this, and all of the other elders were also stunned by this development. It doesn't matter what the devilish army is planning. We just have to stop them. Brother Gu, we can't afford to panic at a time like this. Let's implement our original plan. Fellow Taoists, the survival of our deep heaven city could quite possibly hinge on the outcome of this battle, Buddhist monk Jin Yue suddenly yelled in a rousing manner. We'll be sure to give everything we have in this battle. I can't say that I'm willing to die for the city, but as long as there's any sliver of opportunity for victory, we won't give up, the black-robed demonic cultivator said. All of the other elders also nodded in agreement with grim expressions. The white-robed elderly man gave a pleased nod upon seeing this, then turned to Han Li and transmitted his voice to him. Han Li listened to what he had to say and considered it for a moment before nodding in response. The white-robed elderly man immediately clapped his hands together with glee, and a golden-armored guard quickly descended from the top of the stone pagoda before extending a respectful bow toward the elders. Lead the way for fellow Taoist Han and do as we originally planned. Failure is not an option, the white-robed elderly man ordered in an authoritative voice. Yes, Senior Han, please come with me, the guard said as he turned toward Han Li in a respectful manner. Han Li nodded in response before flying down from the platform as a streak of azure light, and the golden-armored guard hurriedly followed along behind him. Moments later, Han Li arrived at a heavily guarded pavilion that wasn't situated very far away from the city wall down below. In the hall on the first floor of the pavilion, there were 36 male cultivators seated with their legs crossed around a giant formation that had been carved into the ground. These men were all wearing uniform azure tight-fitting robes, and all of them seemed to be between 30 to 40 years of age. There were wisps of green light emanating from their bodies, and this was a clear sign that they were all using an identical cultivation art. However, all of these male cultivators were only at the deity transformation stage, and Han Li's brows furrowed slightly upon realizing this. Furthermore, their auras were very unstable, and it was quite clear that they had forcibly attained their current cultivation bases through some special methods rather than through cultivation. All of these cultivators immediately rose to their feet at the sight of Han Li and the spatial tempering stage golden-armored guard. We pay our respects to our seniors. This is Senior Han. He's the one that you'll have to assist during this battle. Make sure to do everything in your power to cooperate with Senior Han, the golden-armored guard said in a serious voice. The 36 Azure Cloud Guards pay our respects to Senior Han. These azure-robed men seem to have already been notified of this arrangement in advance, so they weren't surprised at all. No need for formalities. I heard that all of you can combine to set up a formation that can trap even a devilish lord for some time. Is that true? Han Li asked. That's right, Senior. Ever since we began cultivating, we've been striving toward the same azure glazed light formation. The azure glazed light formation is an ancient secret formation, and we've honed our mastery of this formation to perfection. The formation doesn't possess much offensive power, but it's extremely effective for trapping enemies and will definitely have no issues containing the average devilish lord, the leader of the azure-robed cultivators replied. Good, once we begin just follow my orders, Han Li said with a pleased nod. The 36 cultivators naturally gave an affirmative response. After that, Han Li sat down right at the center of the giant formation and began to wait for something in silence. As for the golden-armored guard, his job was done and he left the pavilion. Even though the entire pavilion was concealed within a layer of restrictions, the tsunami wave of beastly roars outside could still be heard within it. Immediately thereafter, resounding booms rang out, and countless fluctuations erupted all over Deep Heaven City. The pavilion began to tremor slightly as a result, and it was quite clear that the army of devilish beasts had begun to attack the city. The battle had commenced. The 36 azure-robed men all sat in a completely still manner with their eyes closed, completely ignoring what was happening around them. Meanwhile, Han Li released his enormous spiritual sense out of the restrictions around the pavilion to inspect the situation that was unfolding outside. With his current immensely powerful spiritual sense, he could easily detect everything within a radius of close to 10,000 kilometers under normal circumstances. However, all types of restrictions and formations had been activated in the city, and chaotic energy fluctuations were surging all over the battlefield, thereby severely limiting the scope of his spiritual sense to a radius of only several hundred kilometers. Even so, this was a large enough area for him to gather a rough idea of what was happening. Through his spiritual sense, Han Li discovered that not only was the army of devilish beasts surging toward the city wall like a torrential flood, those metamorphosis stage, high-grade devilish beasts were also on the front lines. Even the weakest of these high-grade devilish beasts were at the spatial tempering stage, and there were even a few early body integration stage devilish beings among them. Under their leadership, the casualties suffered by the devilish army decreased significantly. Furthermore, those super devilish beasts were also shielding the low-grade devilish beasts, and they were doing so in a very cunning manner, gathering together in groups of 4 or 5, and taking turns to shield their brethren on a rotating basis. Thus, it was very difficult to inflict substantial damage on this army of devilish beasts. Atop the massive city wall, streaks of spiritual light were raining down in a torrential downpour, and occasionally, a formation would light up on the city, unleashing large-scale attacks that targeted the densest parts of the army of devilish beasts. Compared to when the devilish army had only been unleashing harassment attacks, the retaliative measures being taken by Deep Heaven City had clearly become more intense. However, there were simply too many devilish beasts to deal with, and a large proportion of them had great defensive prowess. Many of them were able to continue charging toward the city wall even after taking multiple hits and sustaining severe wounds. Mountains of devilish beast carcasses quickly piled up at the foot of the city wall, but the devilish beasts continued to charge onward in a completely fearless manner. As more and more devilish beasts began to reach the restrictions around the city, the protective barrier encompassing Deep Heaven City finally began to show signs of strain. However, neither the Zhu Guang clone nor the elders of Deep Heaven City displayed much of a reaction to this. Only after a series of cracks had begun to appear on the light barrier did the white-robed elderly man abruptly order, "Activate the formation. Unleash the 4 celestial river treasures and spare no expense." A high-grade cultivator immediately appeared on each of the white altars, then made several hand seals in unison. All of the altars began to emit a buzzing sound, and these cultivators began to chant something while pointing at the treasures sitting on the altars. In the next instant, the gourd, screen, longsword, and bowl all began to emit a faint ringing sound. Immediately thereafter, 5-colored light flashed within the formation, and a burst of astonishing spiritual chi erupted forth before surging toward the 4 treasures in a frenzy. Spiritual light swirled over the surfaces of the 4 treasures, and they slowly rose up into the air before beginning to display their powers. The blue bowl and black gourd rotated in midair, then tipped themselves over to expel a swathe of blue crystalline sand and a streak of black water, respectively. The blue sand dispersed downward before the individual grains rapidly multiplied, forming a blue cloud of sand with no end in sight in the blink of an eye. The cloud then descended from above, and tens of thousands of devilish beasts were instantly inundated by it. The countless grains of sand within the cloud churned, and the devilish beasts felt as if countless sharp blades were slicing into their bodies. All of them were instantly reduced to mincemeat, and even their souls didn't manage to escape. As for the black water pouring out of the gourd, it transformed into an enormous waterfall with extremely corrosive properties. As it flowed through the army of devilish beasts, countless devilish beasts instantly had their flesh and bones eroded away, reducing them to nothingness in the blink of an eye. Meanwhile, the silver longsword transformed into a gargantuan blade that was over 10,000 feet in length, then exploded into thousands of silver sword projections amid a resounding boom. These sword projections instantly appeared in the air above the devilish beasts, then swept through their ranks with reckless abandon, slicing through their bodies like tofu. As for the white screen, it was the most understated of the 4 treasures. It merely swelled to around several acres in size, then silently fell upon the horde of devilish beasts before it. What was very alarming was that, when the screen rose up into the air again, all of the devilish beasts beneath it had vanished. Within mere moments, the screen had erased several thousand devilish beasts from existence, and all of the nearby devilish beasts immediately fled in a panicked manner, not daring to get close to the treasure. It had only been a short while since the 4 celestial river treasures had been released, but hundreds of thousands of devilish beasts had already been wiped out. However, the emergence of these treasures was also met by retaliation from the high-grade devilish beings on the battlefield. Several long cries rang out as a black cloud, a gust of yellow wind, and 2 streaks of crimson light rose up from behind the army of devilish beasts before hurtling directly toward the 4 treasures. Han Li's expression changed slightly upon seeing this, and he withdrew his spiritual sense. There was no need for him to continue expending his spiritual sense to see what happened next. The 4 celestial river treasures were indeed extremely powerful, but they were definitely going to be repressed by the high-grade devilish beings, and after that, a true clash of power would ensue between the 2 sides. The most powerful beings among the 2 armies definitely weren't going to join the battle right away. Only after one of either the army of devilish beasts or the restrictions of Deep Heaven City had been wiped out would the true battle begin. Prior to that, all he had to do was wait. He had already decided that he was definitely not going to let that Zhu Guang clone leave this battlefield alive. Time passed by slowly, and the tremors running through the pavilion continued to persist. The occasional earth-shattering boom could be heard even through the restrictions around the pavilion, and it was quite clear that the battle outside was an extremely intense one. However, Han Li and the azure-robed men were completely unmoved and continued to sit in silence. 6 hours later, the tremors running through the hall abruptly ceased, but at the same time, a burst of harrowing fluctuations swept forth amid a string of rumbling explosions. Normal cultivators and low-grade devilish beasts wouldn't be capable of releasing such fluctuations, so it was clear that the high-grade beings of both sides had already sprung into action. Judging from the intensity of the energy fluctuations and the frequency of the explosions, the devilish army seemed to have deployed all of their elite forces at once. Otherwise, the battle wouldn't be this intense. Even as these thoughts flashed through Han Li's mind, he remained completely expressionless. All of a sudden, an ear-piercing screech tore through the restrictions outside and traveled directly into the pavilion, and even Han Li's ears were beginning to throb with pain upon hearing this sound. His expression changed slightly as he immediately swept a sleeve through the air, releasing a burst of gray light that formed a barrier around the entire hall. He then cast his gaze toward the 36 azure-robed cultivators, upon which he discovered that all of them were groaning with pain with their hands over their heads, and there were faint traces of blood trickling out of their ears. Han Li's brows furrowed slightly upon seeing this, and he suddenly gave a cold harumph. The sound was quite a harsh one, but as soon as it traveled into the ears of the 36 cultivators, the agonized looks on their faces were instantly significantly alleviated, and they managed to sit up again. A long while later, these cultivators finally managed to repress the discomfort they were suffering from by circulating their magic power through their own bodies, and their leader turned to Han Li with a grateful salute. "Thank you, Senior. Don't mention it. I require your assistance, so I naturally won't let any harm befall all of you. Judging from the power of that voice, a devilish lord must have joined the battle. Take this time to recover as much as you can. We won't be staying here for much longer," Han Li said. "Yes, Senior Han." The man gave an affirmative reply before hurriedly closing his eyes to meditate once again. Meanwhile, a contemplative look appeared on Han Li's face, and he released his spiritual sense out of the pagoda again. At this point, the 4 celestial river treasures were already nowhere to be seen. As for the massive army of devilish beasts, around 90% of it had been wiped out, and the remaining devilish beasts were all severely wounded. The super devilish beasts were also close to being completely wiped out, and there were only a little more than several of them left on the battlefield. All of them had extremely frail auras, and it was clear that they wouldn't be able to play much more of a role in this battle. In the place of the army of devilish beasts was an army of armor-clad devilish beings, of which there were around 7 million to 8 million. All of the devilish beings among them who were at the nascent soul stage or above had risen up into the air, while the remaining devilish beings could only charge toward the city wall on foot. Within a certainly heavily guarded secret area in Deep Heaven City, there was a super formation that was currently being activated. The formation spanned an area of over 10,000 acres, and it was comprised of over 1,000 smaller formations. The super formation was releasing an invisible flight restriction that encompassed the entirety of Deep Heaven City, as well as the surrounding nearby area. However, in contrast with normal flight restrictions, this one seemed to only affect devilish beings, while all humans remained immune to its effects. Unfortunately, the devilish beings were superior to the cultivators guarding the city wall both in numbers and in terms of overall powers, so even with this disadvantage, they were still able to storm onto the wall, where a chaotic battle had ensued. The protective light barrier around Deep Heaven City had already vanished, and in the air above the city, there were high-grade beings from both sides locked in fierce battles. Groups of beings who were at the deity transformation stage or above were waging battle in the air, and all types of attacks were clashing overhead amid a constant string of resounding booms, creating a spectacular light show up above. Among the battles taking place in the air, there were a few that were particularly eye-catching. In one battle, a black devilish cloud had intertwined with a vast expanse of blue liquid, and they were rapidly rotating to form a giant vortex that was over 100 acres in area. Loud thunderclaps rang out incessantly from within the vortex, and a blue humanoid figure with blue lightning flashing all over their body was engaged in a fierce battle with an inky black humanoid figure. Not far away from the vortex was a massive gray light barrier that encompassed an area in excess of 10,000 feet. Within the light barrier was a giant devilish projection that was expelling gusts of ferocious winds out of its mouth. These gusts of wind then transformed into huge wind blades that swept toward an opposing elderly man, who was wielding a giant fan with both hands. As he waved the fan through the air, blue and red light surged toward the wind blades before transforming into powerful fire and water attribute energy, and both sides were evenly matched. In another battle, there was a black-robed man with a small crimson drum held in one hand high over his own head. He was striking the drum with his other hand, and a burst of red sound waves were proliferating through the air all around him. His opponent was a giant devilish bird with the head of a beauty. The bird had an entirely green body with 4 wings on its back, and it was emitting an ear-piercing screeching sound that managed to hold its own against the red sound waves. There were no other human, demonic, or devilish beings within a radius of several kilometers around them, clearly indicating that their soundwave attacks were capable of impacting a huge area. The sharp screech that had torn through the restrictions around the pagoda that Han Li was situated in had been unleashed by none other than this devilish bird. Thankfully, both of them were using soundwave attacks that could nullify one another. Otherwise, if their soundwave attacks were to disperse throughout the battlefield, countless casualties would result. After scouring the battlefield to ensure that the Zhu Guang clone hadn't yet joined the battle, Han Li immediately withdrew his spiritual sense. His mission was only to oppose that Zhu Guang clone. Seeing as Deep Heaven City was still able to hold its own against the devilish army, there was no need for him to step in. As the devilish lords and elders of the city began to enter the fray, the battle became a lot more intense. There were clearly more devilish lords than the body integration stage elders of Deep Heaven City, but the humans and demons were making up the numbers by sending out groups of spatial tempering cultivators, all of whom were wearing strange attire of different vibrant colors. Derisive smiles appeared on the faces of the devilish lords, yet just as they were about to crush these seemingly mismatched opponents, some of the cultivators suddenly pulled out pills that they quickly stuffed into their own mouths. Immediately thereafter, their bodies expanded drastically in size, and thick fur appeared all over their skin while their teeth transformed into sharp fangs. They had all adopted half-demon forms, and their auras had clearly been significantly elevated as well. It was clear that the pills they had just taken were meant to stimulate their latent potential. Meanwhile, another group of cultivators raised their hands to release a series of inky black bracelets, and in the next instant, fierce yin winds were swept up as a series of huge purple-armored puppets emerged out of thin air. These puppets had pale faces that were completely devoid of blood and pairs of bright green eyes. This was a batch of extremely rare corpse puppets. As soon as these corpse puppets appeared, green light flashed through their eyes as they pounced towards several devilish lords up ahead. Hundreds of these puppets had been summoned at once, and as they rushed forward, fierce yin winds were swept up behind them. The devilish lords chuckled coldly as they conjured up massive devilish palms to swat the puppets down from the heavens, or expelled streaks of black light out of their mouths to slice the puppets apart with ease. In the blink of an eye, the army of puppets had been completely wiped out. Yet just as the devilish lords were about to attack the cultivators who had summoned those puppets, all of the dismembered puppets suddenly regenerated back to their original condition amid bursts of tumbling black chi. Immediately thereafter, these puppets pounced toward the devilish lords again. "Immortal bodies, these puppets aren't as simple as they look," one of the devilish lords exclaimed. Meanwhile, there were several hundred black-robed cultivators seated in an expressionless manner on the ground within a stone pagoda in Deep Heaven City. Before each of them hovered a black wooden puppet that was around half a foot tall, and these wooden puppets had gray runes all over their bodies, as well as faint black chi swirling all around them. These cultivators were constantly making different hand seals, causing the puppets to twist and move as if they were living beings. Just as the devilish lords were reeling from the discovery that these puppets possessed immortal bodies, another group of cultivators abruptly stomped their feet down onto the ground, and a series of massive formation plates emerged beneath them. Flashes of light immediately appeared around the devilish lords, and these cultivators instantly appeared out of thin air. All of them were holding flags that were flashing with 5-colored light, and they were waving the flags through the air as if their lives depended on it. Boom! A resounding boom rang out as layers of 5-colored clouds and mist surged out of the flags in a frenzy to completely inundate the devilish lords. Within the clouds and mist, silver runes tumbled and surged incessantly, and roars of shock and fury immediately rang out. Bursts of violent auras crashed around from within the restriction, but not even a single devilish lord was able to escape. However, as a result, the auras were becoming more and more violent, and a string of rumbling booms began to ring out. Right at this moment, the demonic cultivators who had taken on half-demon forms all summoned golden and silver talismans that they plastered onto their own bodies, and they all transformed into gusts of demonic winds that rushed into the cloud and mist. The rumbling within the cloud and mist instantly intensified even further, and the demonic and devilish auras clashed and intertwined, seemingly evenly matched with one another. With the assistance of the corpse puppets, the half-demon cultivators had managed to trap a total of 7 devilish lords. At the same time, spiritual light flashed inside Deep Heaven City, and over 100 stone pagodas that were tens of thousands of feet tall rose up from the ground before hurtling directly toward the devilish army. The giant battle arcs and devilish pyramid within the devilish army immediately blasted forth countless black pillars of light in retaliation, but 5 colored lights swirled around the surfaces of the massive pagodas, keeping all of the pillars of light at bay. As soon as the pagodas reached close to the devilish army, all of their doors were flung open at once, and countless puppets and spirit beasts erupted froth like a swarm of locusts. The giant arcs and devilish pyramid contained a large number of devilish beings as well, and they also emerged to oppose the oncoming enemies. At this point, Han Li had already withdrawn his spiritual sense, so he was naturally completely oblivious to what was happening outside. He knew that at this stage of the battle, it wouldn't be long before he and azure-robed cultivators were going to be called upon. Sure enough, around an hour later, a loud buzzing sound suddenly rang out from the giant formation beneath him, and a burst of white light was released to inundate all of the azure-robed cultivators. The azure-robed cultivators were initially quite startled by this, and they hurriedly brought out a triangular jade badge each. Spiritual light of different colors emerged from these jade badges, forming a purple rune that revolved around their bodies. Han Li's heart stirred upon seeing this, yet before he had a chance to do anything, the white light emanating from the formation swelled drastically, instantly teleporting him away along with the 36 male cultivators. Moments later, the white light in the formation faded, and Han Li and the others were nowhere to be seen. At the same time, a giant light formation appeared out of thin air, and Han Li and the 36 male cultivators re-emerged amid a flash of spiritual light. The positions that the male cultivators had appeared in seemed to have been meticulously planned out in advance, forming an extremely profound formation around Han Li and 4 other cultivators. In the instant that Han Li appeared, black chi swirled all over his body, and he instantly donned a suit of black armor. At the same time, specks of azure light flashed around him, and 72 small azure swords shot forth out of his body. Only then did he cast his gaze toward the 4 people before him, among which were the white-haired elderly man and Buddhist monk Jin Yue. Both of them had several treasures around them, but one was very pale, while the other had bloodstains all over their robes, and it was quite clear that the battle had not treated them well. In particular, the chest of the white-robed elderly man's robes had been completely torn open, and he was missing an entire arm. Standing before them was a crimson-robed young man, and a burly bronze-skinned man in a beast-thighed garment. The burly man held a mace that was shimmering with green flames while holding a bloody arm in his other hand. That arm seemed to belong to none other than the white-robed elderly man. The white-robed elderly man and Buddhist monk Jin Yue's expressions eased slightly at the sight of Han Li and the 36 male cultivators, and both the crimson-robed young man and the burly man also turned to them in unison. Upon catching sight of Han Li, the young man's eyes were immediately filled with resentment, while a dangerous look flashed through the burly man's eyes. "Fellow Taoist Zhu Guang, is this the person you wanted me to target? His cultivation base seems to be higher than you proclaimed," the burly man said as he turned to the young man with a dark expression. Zhu Guang was initially quite stunned by Han Li's improved cultivation base, but an enlightened look then appeared on his face. This is indeed that Han brat, but he should only be at the mid-body integration stage. Oh, I get it now. He must have been the one making that breakthrough a while back. Rest assured, Brother Xiang, he's only just progressed to the late-body integration stage, so he won't even have had sufficient time to consolidate his cultivation base. It'll be a simple matter for you to take care of him. Are you sure he's the one who made that breakthrough? If another late-body integration cultivator shows up, you'll be in huge trouble, the burly man said as he turned to Han Li with a sinister smile. Even if there's another late-body integration cultivator, I'll take care of them. You just worry about taking down this Han brat for me, Zhu Guang replied in a cold voice. In that case, I have nothing else to say. Just leave this human brat to me. It looks like you'll have your hands full dealing with this formation, the burly man said with a nonchalant look on his face. The formation that he was referring to was none other than the formation conjured up by the 36 male cultivators as soon as they'd appeared. The formation consisted of layers of azure light barriers, with countless silver runes surging over their surfaces, and it encompassed the entire surrounding area with a radius of several kilometers. A temporary formation set up by a bunch of deity transformation cultivators won't be able to trouble me, Zhu Guang said in a disdainful manner. This formation and that human brat are most likely the trump cards prepared against you by the humans. It's not as simple as it looks, the burly man said with a shake of his head. Oh, I forgot that you were quite well versed in the art of formations as well. Is there something special about this formation? Zhu Guang asked in a surprised manner. I can't see much in such a short time. All I was able to ascertain is that this formation is most likely a spatial restriction, the burly man replied. A spatial formation, that is indeed a little troublesome. Thank you for your words of caution, Brother Xiang, Zhu Guang said as his expression darkened slightly. Just as the two devilish beings were communicating with one another, Han Li turned to the white-robed elderly man with furrowed brows and asked, "What's going on here, Brother Gu? Why are you two here, and in such bad condition at that? Who is this late-body integration stage devilish lord?" Han Li's expression remained unchanged, but a chill had run down his spine in the instant that he had caught sight of the burly devilish lord. A wry smile appeared on the white-robed elderly man's face, and he replied with a hint of lingering fear in his eyes. "Things seem to be more troublesome than expected, Brother Han. We have no idea where this devilish lord came from, and we don't have any information on him. Fellow Taoist Jin and I had tried to split up the two of them before summoning you here, but this devilish lord is far more powerful than we anticipated. Fellow Taoist Jin was severely wounded after just a single attack, and one of my arms was torn off as well. Never did I think that there would be such a monstrous body integration stage being. It's almost like he's." Buddhist Master Jin Yue took over from where the white-robed elderly man had left off. "It's almost like he's a half-step grand ascension stage being. You have to be careful, Brother Han. This devilish lord is most likely going to be far more difficult to deal with than that sacred ancestor clone. All of our other body integration cultivators are occupied, including even the body integration stage elders who had been in seclusion in the city for countless years, and the envoys sent here by the Holy Island. So we're the only ones who can take on these two devilish beings. If we lose, this battle will also be lost." Han Li's expression changed slightly upon hearing this, and he released his spiritual sense throughout the surrounding area, upon which he discovered that there were indeed several unfamiliar auras who were battling inky black devils with 3 heads and 6 arms each. "Those are elder devils," Han Li exclaimed at the sight of those black devils. "Indeed, those are devilish beings with the purest devilish bloodline. At the same cultivation base, these body integration stage elder devils are even more powerful than other devilish lords. If it weren't for the emergence of these fearsome devils, we wouldn't have been forced to summon you here early," the white-robed elderly man said with a dark expression. "I see. I assume you would like me to take on this late-body integration stage devilish lord, but what about that sacred ancestor clone?" Han Li asked. The white-robed elderly man and Buddhist monk Jin Yue exchanged a glance before the former gritted his teeth and said, "With this spatial formation to assist us, we should be able to at least keep this clone occupied for a while. You can focus wholeheartedly on facing this devilish lord, Brother Han." Blue light flashed through Han Li's eyes upon hearing this, and he cast his gaze toward the burly man. The burly devilish man just so happened to be looking at him as well, and their eyes immediately met. The deranged excitement on the burly man's face gradually became more pronounced, and faint silver light was shimmering within his pupils. All of a sudden, the burly man rushed forward and appeared at the center of the light barrier, then tossed the elderly man's arm into the air before lashing out with his mace. A resounding boom rang out as the dismembered arm rained down from above as scraps of flesh and blood, filling the entire light barrier with a strong bloody odor. As soon as the blood rained down onto the burly man, it transformed into vibrant red patterns that spread all over his skin. As a result, it was as if the burly man had donned a crimson-runed garment, which created quite a peculiar sight to behold. The white-robed elderly man's expression darkened significantly upon seeing this, but the burly man paid no heed to him at all, as he made an extremely arrogant, provocative hand gesture toward Han Li. Han Li knew that a battle was unavoidable, and he immediately turned to the pair of elders. As we discussed just now, leave this devilish lord to me, but make sure you get that Zhu Guang clone far away from here. I don't want any other unforeseeable factors to affect my battle. As soon as his voice trailed off, he vanished into thin air without waiting for a reply from the two elders, then re-emerged amid a flash of azure light several hundred feet away from the burly man. A ferocious light flashed through the burly man's eyes, and he swung his mace toward Han Li without any hesitation. The green devilish flames on the mace swept forth as a wall of flames that was over 100 feet tall, hurtling directly toward Han Li with devastating might. At the same time, the burly man clenched his other hand into a fist, and also launched it toward Han Li from afar in what seemed to be a completely harmless and nonchalant manner. Han Li's expression darkened upon seeing this, and the azure flying swords around him conjured up layers of azure light barriers that flew directly toward the wall of flames, and at the same time, he reached a fist out of one of his sleeves. The fist was shimmering with golden light and looked as if it had been forged from gold, and there were faint golden runes surging all over it. This was a clear indication that he was close to reaching full mastery in his provenance true devil arts. In the instant that the azure light barriers came into contact with the wall of flames, a string of erratic cracks and pops rang out, and azure light and green flames instantly exploded like exuberant fireworks. All of a sudden, an earth-shattering boom rang out near the wall of flames and azure light barriers, and a gust of fierce green winds emerged alongside a golden fist projection without any warning. The two clashed violently, sending devastating shockwaves proliferating outward in all directions, causing the entire heavens to tremor and quake. Both Han Li and the burly man shuddered as they took several involuntary steps backward. As opposed to being alarmed by this, the excitement on the burly man's face only grew more pronounced, and he let loose a loud roar as he abruptly tossed his mace up into the air, then made a rapid string of hand seals before pointing a finger up at the weapon. The devilish flames on the surface of the mace instantly reared up before transforming into 8 green fiery worms that pounced directly toward Han Li. Each worm was over 300 feet in length, with a single purple horn on each of their heads and green flames surging out of their mouths. Han Li immediately made a hand seal upon seeing this, and the azure sword projections around him converged to form a massive sword at his behest before sweeping through the air. A resounding thunderclap rang out as countless golden arcs of lightning erupted out of the giant sword in a frenzy. The 8 fiery worms were instantly sliced in half by the massive sword, then reduced to devilish flames again by the formidable golden lightning. In the next instant, the giant azure sword vanished into thin air before instantly reappearing directly above the burly man's head amid a burst of spatial fluctuations. The sword was over 1,000 feet in length with golden lightning revolving all over its surface, and as it crashed down from above, a burst of enormous invisible pressure began to descend upon the burly man. Letter 1D487, letter 1D667, letter 1D65A, letter 1D4E, letter 1D66C, letter 1D65A, letter 1D4EC, letter 1D664, letter 1D4F6. In response, the burly man's expression darkened slightly as brilliant crimson light suddenly appeared over one of his arms, and he swept the arm upward to conjure up a dazzling crimson sun. The giant azure sword was instantly destroyed amid a resounding boom, and it seemed that this crimson light was imbued with some kind of incredible power. Han Li's eyes narrowed slightly upon seeing this, and he suddenly made a grabbing motion with both hands. Azure light flashed within his grasp, and 2 azure sword projections appeared before combining to form a giant azure sword again. He flicked his wrists, and the massive sword in his hand split up into 72 small swords once again before revolving around his body. The burly man chuckled coldly, and the dazzling crimson light on his arm faded as a piece of strange crimson armor appeared over his entire arm. The piece of armor had intricate patterns on its surface that were identical to the crimson patterns previously seen on his arm, as if the armor had been manifested from those patterns in the first place. It was quite alarming to Han Li that such a nondescript-looking piece of armor was able to destroy the giant sword projection he had unleashed so easily. All of a sudden, the burly man pointed a finger forward once again, and the green devilish flame surged before transforming into a giant 8-headed devilish worm projection. The massive projection encompassed virtually the entire sky, and it pounced directly toward Han Li, aiming to tear his body into shreds. In the face of such a ferocious counterattack, Han Li remained completely expressionless and didn't even move in the slightest. However, a golden pillar of light suddenly erupted into the air behind him, and within the pillar of light was a projection with 3 heads and 6 arms. The projection swung its 6 arms through the air, and a series of golden fist projections immediately hurtled through the air, completely destroying the oncoming devilish worm. The golden light then faded, and the devilish projection gained a substantial form as it hovered high above Han Li's head, appraising the burly man up ahead in a completely expressionless manner. The burly man faltered initially upon seeing this before a hint of bloodlust flashed through his eyes. "Oh, this golden body seems to be related to the cultivation arts of our holy race. Looks like I really will be able to enjoy a good battle here." As soon as his voice trailed off, countless balls of inky black devilish chi surfaced all over his body, and the crimson patterns on his skin instantly began to glow. After the black chi dispersed, a full suit of crimson armor had appeared over the burly man's body. He threw his head back and guffawed as he slammed his own fists together in front of himself, and a devilish projection that was around 100 feet tall appeared behind him as well. Immediately thereafter, the burly man abruptly vanished amid a gust of fierce winds, and Han Li's pupils instantly contracted upon seeing this, as a pair of translucent wings appeared on his back amid a loud thunderclap. He flapped the wings gently, and countless silver arcs of lightning sprang forth, following which he and the Provenant's golden body vanished into thin air as well. In the next instant, 2 humanoid figures emerged nearby, and one of them had fearsome lightning crackling all over his body, while the other was enveloped in a cloud of formidable devilish chi. Both of them were simultaneous cultivators with immense confidence in their own physical bodies, and a string of violent clashes ensued. Not only were Han Li and the burly man engaged in a physical brawl, they were also attacking one another with different treasures and abilities, and they seemed to be evenly matched. The white-robed elderly man and Buddhist monk Jin Yue were both stunned and ecstatic to see this. They already had a very high opinion of Han Li, but they didn't think that he would actually have the power to contend with this burly devilish man. In contrast with the elation in their eyes, the Zhu Guang clone's expression darkened even further, and a vicious light flashed through his eyes as he suddenly raised a hand to release something. However, right at this moment, a white light formation abruptly emerged beneath him before immediately releasing a burst of spatial fluctuations. Crab. The Zhu Guang clone had the knowledge and experience of a Grand Ascension stage powerful being, and it immediately tried to rush out of the formation, but it was already too late. The space around him warped, and the surrounding environment changed drastically as he found himself in a strange space that was filled with faint white mist. Within the same space, the white-robed elderly man and Buddhist monk Jin Yue were appraising him with grim expressions. "HMPH, you two dare to try and stop me. So be it, I'll take care of both of you, then go after that Han brat," the Zhu Guang clone said as a hint of killing intent flashed through his cold eyes. The white-robed elderly man turned to Buddhist monk Jin Yue with a calm expression and said, "Looks like we'll really have to give it our all here, fellow Taoist Jin. If you have any abilities or treasures that you've been hiding, now would be the time to bring them out. Either he dies in here, or we die. Of course, I'm going to keep this devil here even if I have to give my life to do so," Buddhist monk Jin Yue said with a determined look in his eyes. "Haha, that's all I needed to hear," the white-robed elderly man chortled as he suddenly flipped his hands over to reveal a pair of treasures. One of them was a fan refined from 7 colored feathers that was glowing with red light, while the other was a string of 5 shimmering silver interconnected rings. 7 flame fan and unbroken rings. You really are hiding some powerful spirit treasures, Brother Gu. Buddhist monk Jin Yue's eyes immediately lit up with elation at the sight of these 2 treasures. Immediately thereafter, he swept his own cassia through the air to release a torrent of countless Buddhist runes, which then transformed into 18 golden Buddha projections. Initially, these Buddha projections were only just barely visible, but mere moments later, all of them attained substantial forms amid a flash of golden light. Golden bodies, No, those are only crude replicas. The Zhu Guang clone was initially quite alarmed to see these Buddha projections, but a derisive smile then quickly appeared on his face. Even if they're only golden body replicas, 18 of them is more than enough to vanquish a devil like you. Buddhist monk Jin Yue said as he abruptly made a hand seal, and a seven-colored halo that was several tens of feet in size appeared behind his head. The seven-colored halo swept over the 18 golden Buddha projections, and all of them opened their eyes as if they had sprung to life. Zhu Guang's expression darkened upon seeing this, and he laid a hand onto the back of his own head without any hesitation, upon which a giant crimson skull emerged amid a sharp ringing sound. The skull was around 50 to 60 feet in size, and there were countless wisps of gray chi revolving around it. As soon as it appeared, it let loose a ferocious roar and released an astonishing baleful aura. The white-robed elderly man immediately flapped his seven-flame fan toward the distance, and also tossed the 5 shimmering unbroken rings forward at the same time. The seven-flame fan was the spirit treasure that inspired the creation of the replica triflame fan, which Han Li had used back in the human world. That spirit treasure replica had helped him overcome countless powerful enemies in the past, and the spirit treasure itself was naturally even more formidable. A rumbling boom rang out as countless crimson runes swept forth from the surface of the fan, then transformed into a crimson fiery bird that was around 100 feet in size. The fiery bird flapped its wings, and 7 colored flames surged forth from its body, filling the entire heavens with a scorching aura as the flames swept toward the Zhu Guang clone. As for the 5 silver rings, in the instant that they were tossed forward, they transformed into 5 giant rings that were arranged into a line next to one another. It was as if 5 silver full moons had appeared in the sky, and they descended in unison. Meanwhile, Buddhist monk Jin Yue had also sprung into action, chanting a profound incantation that caused the 18 golden Buddha projections to vanish in a flash. In the next instant, golden light flashed around the Zhu Guang clone, and the Buddha projections re-emerged in a completely silent manner. Even though they weren't doing anything, bursts of tremendous invisible force were converging toward Zhu Guang from all sides. Zhu Guang harumphed coldly as a crimson devilish cloud emerged from his body, and he swept his sleeves through the air, sending countless balls of crimson light flying in all directions. At the same time, the crimson skull behind him blurred before hurtling directly toward the fiery bird as a projection. Thus, a fierce battle ensued between the Zhu Guang clone and the pair of body integration stage elders. A rumbling boom akin to an explosive thunderclap rang out, and Han Li's mountains were wrenched out of his grasp while his body was forced back for over 100 feet before he managed to just barely steady himself. A slightly abnormal flush appeared on his face, then disappeared in a flash, and at the same time, the burly devilish man had also been forced back for over 100 feet. Meanwhile, Han Li's golden body was engaged in a ferocious battle against a mountainous inky black monster. Golden light intertwined with black chi amid a string of rumbling explosions, but both the Provenance golden body and the mountainous black monster were able to shrug off each other's attacks with ease. At most, they would be forced back for a short distance before immediately pouncing toward their opponent again, and it was as if they both possessed indestructible bodies. Not bad. This is the first time I've encountered someone who's able to match the power of my physical body. However, if this is the extent of your power, then there's no point in continuing this, the burly man said as he flexed his faintly throbbing wrists. The insanity on his face had already disappeared and had been replaced by a frosty expression. Don't you think you're spewing too much manure out of that big mouth of yours? Han Li countered in an expressionless manner as he circulated his own enormous spiritual power, and the slight discomfort he was experiencing was instantly alleviated. HMPH, I was trying to allow you to live for a bit longer. Seeing as you're interested in accepting my generosity, I'll send you on your way. The burly man guffawed as the devilish projection behind him instantly adopted a substantial form, revealing itself to be a massive 3-headed devilish lion. As soon as the projection attained a substantial body, its aura was significantly enhanced, and a layer of crimson flames instantly appeared over the surface of the burly man's suit of armor. The burly man then chuckled coldly as he slowly raised his hands before pointing his fingers toward Han Li and slowly closing his eyes. Meanwhile, the 3 heads of the devilish lion slowly opened their eyes, casting their gaze toward Han Li in a completely emotionless manner. Han Li was immediately struck by a bone-chilling sensation upon seeing this, and he hurriedly made a hand seal, upon which the Provenant's golden body that was locked in combat with the black monster in the distance abruptly vanished. At the same time, his body swelled drastically in size, and he instantly transformed into a giant golden ape that was over 100 feet tall. Golden light flashed behind the giant ape, and the golden body appeared before combining as one with the golden ape. As a result, the golden ape's aura was significantly enhanced, and two mountains, one black and one azure, also appeared beside it. Right at this moment, crimson light flashed from the hands of the burly man, and two extremely dense pillars of crimson light erupted forth. The devilish lion behind him also opened its three mouths to expel three pillars of light, which were azure, black, and white in color. After just a single flash, the five pillars of light combined as one mid-flight to form an even thicker pillar of four-colored light. The pillar of light wasn't releasing any sound at all, but the terrifying power imbued within it made even Han Li shudder with apprehension. He immediately placed his hands onto the two mountains beside him, then injected his magic power into them in a frenzy. The pair of mountains swayed before swelling to several thousand feet in size, forming a massive barricade in front of Han Li. In the next instant, the four-colored pillar of light struck the pair of mountains with tremendous force, and an earth-shattering boom rang out as a burst of four-colored light rose to over 10,000 feet tall, then completely inundated both of the mountains in its path, as well as the giant ape behind the mountains. Within the four-colored light, the two extreme mountains rapidly shrank as their surfaces warped and twisted, and they both vanished within the span of just a few breaths. Without the barricade formed by the two extreme mountains, the fearsome four-colored light was free to surge directly toward Han Li. The giant golden ape immediately let loose a thunderous roar as a suit of black devilish armor appeared over its body, and the suit of armor released countless black runes, which formed a giant black light barrier that kept the torrent of four-colored light at bay. A string of resounding booms rang out as the black light barrier strained and groaned, looking as if it could collapse at any moment. The golden ape let loose another ferocious roar as golden light swirled over its body, and it swelled to over 10 times its original size. At the same time, two more heads and four additional arms appeared on its body amid a flash of golden light, transforming it into a colossal ape with 3 heads and 6 arms. As soon as the transformation was complete, Han Li made a grabbing motion upward with all 6 of his hands, and 6 balls of piercing golden light emerged in unison, before combining as one to form a golden vortex that was around an acre in size. The golden vortex rotated on the spot, releasing a burst of tremendous power that clashed in a vicious manner with the sea of four-colored light. Another deafening boom rang out, and powerful shockwaves swept forth in all directions, causing the nearby space to twist and warp, as if it were about to be torn apart. The burly man's expression changed slightly upon seeing this, and he immediately withdrew the pillars of crimson light being released by his hands. Furthermore, his face had paled slightly in the wake of that attack, seemingly indicating that he had expended a lot of energy to unleash it. At the same time, the 3-headed devilish lion also closed all 3 of its mouths to cease its attacks, and the light in its 6 eyes had dimmed significantly as well. However, after the dazzling lights faded to reveal what lay in the distance, a look of astonishment appeared on the burly man's face for the first time. The giant golden ape was still standing, making a series of hand seals with its 6 hands. Not only had the massive golden vortex in front of it not disappeared, it had swelled to over 10 times its original size, and golden halos were being released from its center. That attack I just unleashed was about as powerful as a casual strike from a Grand Ascension stage being. It seems I really did underestimate you, the burly man said with a hint of surprise in his eyes. It would be rude not to reciprocate, so why don't you take one of my attacks as well? Han Li said in a cold voice as he made a grabbing motion with all 6 of his hands, and the giant vortex was rapidly compressed into a head-sized ball of golden light. Han Li then abruptly stepped forward, and his enormous body instantly vanished alongside the golden ball of light. The burly man's pupils contracted upon seeing this, and he immediately looked up, just in time to see Han Li reappear above him amid a flash of golden light before hurling the golden ball of light viciously downward from above. The golden ball of light wasn't very large, but as soon as it was hurled through the air, it instantly reverted back into a giant vortex that came crashing down toward the burly man. A burst of enormous invisible force erupted out of the vortex, forcing the burly man down into a hunched-over position. At the same time, the nearby space twisted and warped, looking as if it were about to crumble at any moment. An unhealthy flush appeared on the burly man's face, and his body was also trembling slightly under the fearsome pressure exerted upon him by the vortex, but he refused to be crushed. A vicious light flashed through his eyes as he let loose a loud roar, and a burst of piercing crimson flames erupted over his suit of battle armor, while an extremely formidable aura surged out of his body. The crimson flames charred the nearby space black, and the tremendous force weighing down upon him was alleviated, allowing him to stand up straight again before making a grabbing motion upward. The three-headed devilish lion above him instantly exploded into a cloud of black mist amid a dull thump, and the mist swept toward his hand before forming an inky black devilish spear that was around 10 feet in length. The entire spear was shimmering with black spiritual light, and the spearhead was split up into 3 prongs, all of which were covered in blue spiritual symbols and engraved with the image of a fierce lion's head. Letter 1D557, letter 1D5FF, letter 1D556, letter 1D41E, letter 1D430, letter 1D5F2, letter 1D68C, letter 1D428, letter 1D696. A ferocious look appeared on the burly man's face as he hurled the spear through the air, and it instantly vanished into the center of the vortex. In the instant that the spear vanished into the enormous vortex, the latter instantly shattered amid a dull thump, then disintegrated into countless specks of spiritual light. The burly made a grabbing motion again, and the inky black devilish spear re-emerged before he tossed it through the air a second time without any hesitation. On this occasion, the spear was targeting the 3-headed giant ape in the distance, who was rooted to the spot in the wake of the golden vortex's abrupt destruction. The spear reached Han Li in a flash, and his heart jolted as he immediately swung his 6 arms through the air. 6 shimmering golden heavy weapons instantly appeared in his hands before being swung viciously toward the black spear. An earth-shattering boom erupted as golden light and black chi intertwined before both were vanquished at the same time. Han Li's pupils contracted upon seeing this, yet before he had a chance to do anything else, the burly man repeated the same grabbing and hurling motion, sending yet another devilish spear flying toward Han Li. Han Li harumphed coldly as he conjured up 6 golden weapons in his hands again, and just like last time, the golden weapons and black spear canceled one another out again. It was now the burly man's turn to be rooted to the spot. During this split-second delay, Han Li let loose a low roar as he conjured up another set of 6 weapons before hurling them forward all at once. His 3 heads began to chant in unison, and bright golden light emanated from the 6 weapons as they rapidly released one projection after another. In the blink of an eye, several thousand golden projections had appeared, and all of them were raining down from above, creating a magnificent sight to behold. The burly man's expression darkened upon seeing this, but he wasn't panicked in the slightest. Instead, a cold smile appeared on his face as he expelled a ball of purple light out of his mouth. As soon as the ball of purple light emerged, it rotated on the spot before self-detonating, sending countless threads of light flying in all directions to create an enormous net. The golden projections hurtled into the net in a torrential downpour, and a rapid string of explosions ensued. Golden and purple light intertwined as the entire net tremored and flashed violently, looking as if it could be torn apart at any moment. However, the burly man paid no heed to this at all as he chanted something before flicking his 10 fingers rapidly through the air. With each flick of his finger, the crimson flames burning over his body would dim slightly, but the net of light up above would swell further in size as a result. Moments later, the giant net had swelled to several times its original size, transforming into a boundless purple cloud. The purple cloud swept up all of the oncoming golden projections at the burly man's behest, then transformed into a purple ball of light that descended from above. The burly man waved a hand through the air, and the ball of light instantly landed in his grasp. However, as he cast his gaze upward again, his expression immediately darkened. He discovered that Han Li had vanished from his original spot, yet before he had a chance to do anything, spatial fluctuations abruptly erupted behind him, following which a shimmering golden beastly paw sprang forth out of thin air. The paw was over 100 feet in size and came crashing down toward the burly man like a small mountain. Each sharp nail on the paw was like a giant golden blade, and several of them were converging toward the burly man at once. The burly man harumphed coldly as brilliant crimson flames erupted from his hand, and he reached out to retaliate the giant golden paw without any fear nor hesitation. There was an enormous size difference between the two, but as soon as the burly man thrust his hand through the air, it swelled to over 100 times its original size. The golden paw and crimson palm clashed, and the former was instantly destroyed by a burst of incredible power. At the same time, a golden shadow shot backward, revealing itself to be a small, shimmering golden beast. The beast was only several feet in size, but it was giving off a body integration stage aura. It was none other than the leopard Kirin beast. Han Li had surreptitiously released the beast so that it could sneak over to the burly man and launch a sneak attack, but that plan seemed to have fallen through. In the instant that the leopard Kirin beast was sent flying, silver light flashed beside the burly man, and a streak of silver light sprang forth to bind the burly man's body in a completely unexpected manner. Immediately thereafter, spatial fluctuations erupted as Han Li re-emerged, and as soon as he appeared, he swung the 6 golden weapons in his hands toward the burly man with tremendous force. At the same time, he opened all 3 of his mouths to expel 3 balls of silver flames, which transformed into 3 fire ravens that flew directly toward the burly man. In the face of these powerful attacks, the burly man remained completely unflustered. The crimson flames over his body swelled to destroy the silver streak of light that was binding him, following which the black spear reappeared in his hand amid a surge of black chi. The spear was then immediately hurled toward Han Li, and it split up into 9 identical devilish spears mid-flight. 6 of them hurtled directly toward the 6 golden weapons, while the remaining 3 were aimed at the 3 silver fire ravens. The 6 golden weapons and 3 silver fire ravens were all instantly vanquished by the 9 spears, and Han Li's expression changed slightly upon seeing this, as he quickly shielded himself with his 6 arms. The space in front of his arms instantly warped and twisted, following which another black spear shot forth out of thin air. However, before it could strike Han Li's arms, black gauntlets appeared on his arms amid a surge of black runes, and both the gauntlets and the spear instantly vanished upon coming into contact with one another. Han Li heaved an internal sigh of relief upon seeing this, but a peculiar look suddenly appeared on the burly man's face as he uttered the word destroy in a bone-chilling voice. Black light flashed from where the black spear had just vanished, and a miniature spear that was only around half a foot in length sprang forth in a completely silent manner. Under the disguise of the larger spear, even Han Li's enormous spiritual sense completely failed to detect this miniature spear, and he didn't have a chance to do anything before the spear struck his bare arms and exploded violently. A giant ball of black light that was over 10,000 feet in size appeared in midair, completely enveloping Han Li's body like a black sun. Han Li only had time to conjure up a layer of golden light around himself before he was completely inundated by the inky black light. Meanwhile, the black devilish sun was still expanding at a rapid rate, and everything in the surrounding area that was swept up into it was instantly reduced to dust. The burly man chortled with glee upon seeing this. "Ha! No one has been able to survive my 9 devilish hierarchical spears yet. You should be quite proud of yourself for forcing me to unleash such an ability." The giant black sun finally began to shrink before vanishing after a few more flashes, and the burly man's laughter was abruptly cut off as an astonished look appeared on his face. "Impossible, how could this be?" the burly man said in a voice that was trembling slightly. There in the distance, a golden ball of light was hovering in midair. Within the golden light was a giant golden ape, a 5-colored phoenix, and a massive silver bird. The giant golden ape had its hands pressed against the golden light, injecting bursts of golden spiritual light into it in a frenzy. The 5-colored phoenix and giant silver bird remained still on the spot, but the 5-colored light and silver lightning being released by them surged out of the golden light and formed 2 additional protective barriers. The giant ape, colorful phoenix, and massive bird all wore completely wooden expressions that were devoid of spiritual nature. It was as if they were a trio of puppets. The burly man was stunned to see this, and he hurriedly cast his gaze around himself as if to try and find something, but there was nothing to be seen. He harumphed coldly as he suddenly waved a hand toward the distance, and a black object instantly appeared beside him. It was none other than that black ghostly monster that had been battling the Provenant's golden body earlier. The black chi around the monster faded, revealing it to be a black wooden puppet with countless golden and silver runes inscribed onto the surface of its body. The puppet had an extremely menacing appearance with 4 remarkably long limbs, and faint crimson light flashing in its eyes. What was most harrowing to behold was the faint purple human face on the back of the puppet's head. The face appeared to be quite ordinary, but its eyes were tightly shut, and just the mere sight of it struck the beholder with a bone-chilling sensation. As soon as the burly man summoned the puppet to his side, a change suddenly began to take place within the golden light in the distance. In the area between the giant ape, colorful phoenix, and silver bird, specks of golden light flashed before forming a faint golden infant with a completely identical set of facial features as Han Li. Its body was encased in a suit of inky black devilish armor, and there were several tens of miniature azure swords revolving around it. It was none other than Han Li's nascent soul. As soon as the nascent soul, the three creatures around it immediately shot forth toward it in unison. Piercing golden light erupted, and a huge humanoid figure with 3 heads and 6 arms appeared. The humanoid figure's entire body was of a shimmering golden color, and the entirety of its skin was covered in a layer of golden scales. There was a single azure horn on its head, and an inky black demonic eye on its glabella. The humanoid figure was none other than Han Li, but in this current form, he gave off a very dangerous and unsettling aura. His eyes were completely emotionless, and there was a hint of blue light flashing within them. The burly man looked into Han Li's eyes, and his own eyes were immediately struck by a sharp pain, as if needles were being driven into them, and his heart jolted with shock as he instinctively closed his eyes. Right at this moment, Han Li suddenly raised a hand before pressing it gently into the air up ahead. A dull thump rang out in front of the burly man without any warning, and a burst of enormous force crashed toward him like a volcanic eruption. The burly man hadn't reopened his eyes yet, but through his spiritual sense, he could still sense just how fearsome this burst of power was. His expression changed drastically as crimson flame swept forth from his body. At the same time, an inky black badge suddenly appeared in his hand, and it quickly swelled to several tens of feet in size before positioning itself in front of him like a huge shield. In the next instant, both the barrier formed by the crimson flames and the enlarged black badge were destroyed with ease by that burst of power, and it came crashing toward the burly man without any further impediment. The burly man opened his eyes with an incredulous look on his face, but that was immediately replaced by a ferocious expression as he stomped his feet into the air down below before thrusting his hands forward violently. 2 black fist projections erupted forth amid a flash of golden light, then swelled drastically like a pair of balloons before crashing into the oncoming burst of power. A dull thump rang out, and the 2 fist projections were also instantly destroyed, following which the burly man flew backward like a tossed rag, and only after flying back for over 100 feet did he just barely manage to steady himself. At this moment, the burly man's face was completely red, as if he were heavily inebriated, and he couldn't help but throw up a mouthful of inky black blood. The attack that Han Li had just unleashed seemed to be quite nonchalant, but it was actually imbued with incredible power and instantly managed to wound this number 1 devilish lord. You're using the myriad origin power of the holy nirvana physique. That's impossible. How could a mere human master the peerless ability of our holy realm? The burly man was too stunned to even wipe the blood from the corners of his lips, and he was staring intently at Han Li as if he were looking at a ghost. At the same time, Han Li swayed slightly, and he also threw up a mouthful of blood, but this blood was golden in color and instantly vanished into nothingness as soon as it exited his mouth. Myriad origin power. I guess that's what it is. Seeing as you forced me to unleash this ability, there's no way I can allow you to live. The golden scales on Han Li's face receded to reveal a set of pale facial features. You're suffering backlash. You haven't mastered the ability. You're only forcibly using it. It looks like you won't be able to unleash many more attacks of that caliber, the burly man said as his expression eased significantly. That is indeed true, but I'll only require 1 more attack to kill you, Han Li said in a cold voice. As soon as his voice trailed off, countless golden runes surged forth from his body. At the same time, he laid a hand onto the back of his own head, and 5 balls of golden light flew forth before transforming into 5 different projections, comprised of a giant ape, a colorful phoenix, a silver bird, a vibrant peacock, and a golden dragon. As soon as these projections appeared, all of them let loose long cries before vanishing into Han Li's body in a flash. In the next instant, a layer of golden light flashed over Han Li's face, and he let loose a roar of agony as he made a hand seal, upon which his body swelled to over 100 feet in size. At the same time, a golden head and 2 golden-scaled armors appeared on his body, giving him 2 heads and 4 arms. The second head also had an azure horn and a 3rd demonic eye, and the golden scale on his massive body fused in a flash to form a suit of intricate golden armor. The armor had no chinks at all, and there were countless silver ruins on its surface. Furthermore, it was giving off a strong primordial aura, as if it had been created alongside heaven and earth. Second Nirvana transformation. Have you gone insane? You can't even control first Nirvana power, yet you're forcibly using second Nirvana power. You're going to self-detonate before you can kill me. The burly man exclaimed as a horrified look appeared on his face for the first time. Even if I self-detonate, it'll be after you die. Bluish golden light flashed through Han Li's eyes as his aura swelled dramatically, and he slowly raised his forearms before thrusting them toward the burly man. Heaven and earth dimmed as faint golden light flashed, and 4 giant golden palms appeared above the burly man's head in unison. Each palm was imbued with power that was no less potent than that of the previous attack, and they combined as one in a flash to form a mountainous palm that was several thousand feet in size before crashing down from above. The mountainous golden palm was falling in a completely silent manner, but it had already locked onto the burly man's devilish soul, making it impossible for him to evade and forcing him to take the attack head-on. I can't die here, the burly man roared as a deranged look appeared on his face. He raised both of his arms into the air to release a dozen or so balls of light of different colors, all of which were top-grade treasures that hurtled directly toward the giant golden palm. At the same time, piercing crimson flames erupted over his body, and a giant blade that was shimmering with golden and silver light appeared in his hands. He swung the blade upward with all his might, and a golden and silver blade projection swept forth before striking the golden palm before all of the top-grade treasures. An earth-shattering boom rang out, and the blade projection instantly exploded, sending streaks of golden and silver light sweeping through the surrounding air and slicing rifts into the nearby space. However, it hadn't been able to leave even the slightest trace on the golden palm. Right at this moment, the dozen or so top-grade treasures also struck the golden palm, and the burly man let loose a desperate roar as all of the treasures self-detonated in rapid succession. The enormous power generated by the detonation of the top-grade treasures instantly inundated the entire golden palm, and the resulting energy fluctuations sent gusts of fierce wind sweeping in all directions. However, the burly man was still in a panic frenzy, as he slashed the golden and silver blade in his hands wildly up into the air over and over again. One blade projection after another swept into the giant golden palm, and a relentless string of resounding booms rang out, shaking the entire heavens. Such a fearsome barrage of attacks naturally required a tremendous amount of magic power output, and the burly man's face was becoming paler and paler. However, the golden palm only tremored slightly in the face of his attacks, but continued to descend at an even pace. The burly man's horror became even more pronounced at the sight of the approaching golden palm, and he immediately decided to make one final roll of the dice. Black devilish chi erupted from behind him as that 3-headed black devilish lion projection appeared once again, then plunged into the black wooden puppet beside him. A string of cracks and pops abruptly rang out from within the puppet's body, and halos of black light proliferated through the air. A layer of black light swirled over the surface of the puppet, and it transformed into a true 3-headed devilish lion with a substantial form. The lion raised all 3 of its heads at once to send 3 pillars of light of different colors erupting up into the air, then fled the scene as a ball of black light. The giant golden palm continued to crash downward, destroying the pillars of light and blade projections with ease, then instantly reduced to the burly man's body to nothingness. Almost at the exact same moment as the burly man's body was destroyed, Han Li also gave a muffled groan, and the additional head and pair of arms he had attained instantly disintegrated into specks of golden light. The golden suit of armor he was wearing also quickly disappeared, along with the azure horn on his head. His giant body then reverted back to its original size, and he was back to his normal human force. However, at this moment, his face was completely pale and devoid of color, and his aura was also rapidly on the wane. In the instant that he reverted back to his human form, Han Li flipped both hands over to produce several small vials, and he opened all of them before tipping the pills in the vials into his mouth without exercising any discretion. An unhealthy flush then appeared on his face, and it was only alleviated after a layer of azure light flashed over his face. Han Li exhaled as his expression eased slightly, and he cast his gaze toward the spot where the burly man had been standing just a moment ago. The giant golden palm had disappeared in the instant that he had reverted back to his human form, so there was nothing to be seen in the distance. Letter 1D453, letter 1D4C7, letter 1D626, letter 212F, letter 1D638, letter 1D626, letter 1D450, letter 1D45C, letter 1D4C2. However, just as Han Li was about to withdraw his gaze, spatial fluctuations suddenly erupted, and a ball of black light appeared, containing the three-headed devilish lion puppet that had only just barely managed to escape the massive golden palm. It also cast its gaze toward the spot where the burly man's body had just disappeared, and its three heads let loose thunderous roars of fury in unison. I've been cultivating that physical body for over 100,000 years. How dare you destroy it? I'm going to tear you into shreds and torture your soul for all of eternity. The devilish lion then instantly pounced toward Han Li as a streak of black light. It knew that in Han Li's current severely debilitated state, there was no way that he could be a match for this puppet. Thus, in its fit of fury and resentment, it was determined to kill Han Li as revenge for destroying its physical body. Han Li's brows furrowed slightly upon seeing this, and he murmured to himself, so he abandoned his physical body to save his soul. If he's only possessed a puppet, then he should be nowhere near as powerful as he normally would be. As soon as his voice trailed off, he immediately stomped a foot onto the ground down below, and a small white light formation appeared, upon which his body began to blur. I won't let you get away. The devilish lion roared in an urgent voice at the sight of the teleportation formation, and it sped up significantly, reaching Han Li in a flash before slashing its claws toward him in an attempt to tear his body apart. However, it was already too late. A buzzing sound rang out from the formation, and Han Li vanished amid a flash of white light. The devilish lion puppet's claws instantly tore the light formation apart, but Han Li remained completely unscathed. However, the devilish lion clearly wasn't going to give up so easily. It released its enormous spiritual sense throughout the surrounding area, then opened all three of its mouths to blast three pillars of light toward a certain area of space. The three pillars of light struck the same spot in the air, and a loud explosion erupted as a figure stumbled out of thin air. A vicious look immediately appeared on the devilish lion's center head, but its expression then abruptly stiffened. The figure that had appeared up ahead was a small golden beast. It was none other than the leopard Kirin beast. The small beast had somehow switched places with Han Li and withstood that attack in his stead. It possessed early body integration stage powers, and it hadn't expended much magic power during this battle, but it was clearly no match for the three-headed devilish lion. Not only had it been forced to reveal itself by the devilish lion's attack, a large patch of its golden fur had been charred black as well. Despite this, the leopard Kirin beast wasn't backing down at all, and it immediately let loose a low roar as a layer of golden light flashed over its body, upon which its charred fur immediately regenerated back to its original condition. At the same time, a golden Kirin projection had appeared behind it. So you possess a Kirin bloodline. HMPH, even so, you're only asking for death by standing in my way. The three-headed devilish lion harumphed coldly as it lashed out with one of its inky black paws. Countless arcs of black lightning appeared over the paw, then vanished amid a resounding boom. In the next instant, black lightning appeared in the air above the leopard Kirin beast, then formed a giant black lightning paw that was around 10 feet in size before crashing down with tremendous force. Before the paw had fallen upon the leopard Kirin beast, several bolts of black lightning came crashing down in advance. Spatial fluctuations erupted down below, and an azure humanoid figure appeared. It was none other than Han Li, and even though his aura was still very feeble, he remained completely unfazed by the sight of the giant lightning paw crashing down from above. Instead, a cold smile appeared on his face. Right at this moment, the leopard Kirin beast let loose a ferocious roar and split up into over 10 projections in midair, all of which appeared right above Han Li's head in a wraith-like manner. The projections then unleashed countless yellow claw projections that hurtled through the air, intertwining to form a giant net that sped directly toward the black lightning paw. A resounding boom rang out as black lightning erupted from the giant black paw, destroying the oncoming net of claw projections with ease. Round a dozen thick bolts of lightning then destroyed all of the leopard Kirin beast projections, and the true body of the leopard Kirin beast was also struck. It let loose an anguished howl as it sprang back for over 100 feet. An even larger section of its fur had been charred black, and its aura had also been debilitated somewhat. The devilish lion chortled with glee as the giant lightning paw crashed down directly toward Han Li, yet just as it was about to fall upon him, Han Li suddenly brought his hands together before bringing them apart, upon which a long dragon's roar rang out. A streak of golden light erupted from between his hands before flashing through the black lightning paw up above, upon which the giant paw was instantly reduced to nothingness. The devilish lion was quite befuddled by this development, yet before it could figure out what had happened, the golden streak of light suddenly circled around before transforming into a massive pillar of light that was over 10,000 feet tall. Within the pillar of light was a halberd projection, and countless specks of golden light instantly appeared in the surrounding area before surging toward the projection like moths to a flame. An astonishing aura was then released by the golden halberd, stirring up all of the world's origin chi in the entire heavens. Right at this moment, the halberd projection flashed with golden light, and the entire pillar of light transformed into a colossal golden halberd. The three-headed devilish lion's expression changed drastically upon seeing this, and it immediately attempted to flee as a streak of black light. A cold light flashed through Han Li's eyes as he pointed a finger at the devilish lion, and the enormous golden halberd immediately came crashing down upon it. The devilish lion appeared over 1,000 feet away after just a single flash, yet just as it was about to unleash an ability to escape out of the spatial restriction, the air suddenly tightened around it, and it found itself unable to muster up any magic power. Crab! An expression of shock and horror appeared on the devilish lion's face, immediately following which its vision turned dark, and its consciousness completely faded. From Han Li's perspective, the giant golden halberd had fallen upon the three-headed devilish lion before instantly reducing its body to dust. Even the devilish soul of the burly man contained within the puppet had also been completely destroyed. Only now was the burly man truly dead, and no trace of him was left in this world. Han Li heaved a long sigh of relief as his expression eased significantly. The attack that had dealt the killing blow just now was naturally none other than the heavenly halberd talisman that he had painstakingly refined. As expected of a powerful talisman from the true immortal realm, it was able to instantly vanquish such a formidable enemy. Of course, this was also due to the fact that the burly man's body had already been destroyed, so it was in a severely debilitated state. Otherwise, that talisman alone wouldn't have been enough to kill him. As for the ability he had used earlier to destroy the burly man's physical body, that was one of the most powerful abilities recorded in the Provenant's true devil arts. However, just as the burly man had said, Han Li's current powers and physical constitution weren't enough to unleash such an ability. It was something that he could only use without suffering backlash after reaching the Grand Ascension stage. Han Li had experimented with the ability during his time in seclusion, so he was naturally aware of this as well. However, the holy Nirvana body was simply far too powerful. Even the first Nirvana transformation was able to drastically enhance his magic power and physical strength. Thus, after much painstaking effort and consideration, Han Li finally thought of a way to forcibly unleash the ability, which was to temporarily stimulate the true spirit blood within his body and draw upon its power to fuel the ability for him. Currently, employing this method harmed Han Li almost as much as it did his opponent. Not only was the ability extremely taxing to use, the true spirit blood that he had to expend to use it was an extremely heavy price to pay. Thus, he initially hadn't planned to use this ability in this battle. However, that burly man had been truly formidable. In particular, the 9 devilish hierarchical spears he had unleashed were comparable in power to a full-force attack from a Grand Ascension stage being. If he had faced that attack in nothing more than his giant mountain ape form, he would have at least been severely wounded, if not killed on the spot. Thus, he had no choice but to release his nascent soul and draw upon his own true spirit power, to manifest those true spirit avatars to help him withstand that attack. However, the burly man wasn't someone who could be killed through normal attacks, and seeing as he had already activated his true spirit blood at that point, he decided to bite the bullet and use the holy Nirvana physique. Of course, Han Li was able to use the ability without any fear of its aftereffects, as he also had another trump card in the form of the heavenly halberd talisman up his sleeve. Sure enough, the combination of those 2 trump cards had allowed him to slay this extremely formidable devilish lord. However, at this point, he had expended most of his magic power, and his combat prowess was now pitifully weak. As such, he had no choice but to summon a yellow futon and immediately sat down onto it to meditate and recuperate. The pills that he had taken earlier had ensured that he didn't self-detonate, but there was naturally no way that he could have absorbed all of them in such a short time, so there was an extremely fearsome burst of medicinal power gathered within his body. If he couldn't repress this medicinal power in time, then the consequences would be catastrophic. Thankfully, there was a spatial restriction around him, and the leopard Kirin beast was also present, so he didn't have to worry about being disrupted. A short while later, a layer of golden light appeared over Han Li's body, and he suddenly made a hand seal before pointing a finger toward his own chest several times in rapid succession. A dozen or so hair-thin silver threads shot forth before vanishing into his body in a flash, sealing off some vital parts of his meridians. He then swept sleeve through the air to release a dozen or so talismans of different colors, which also flew directly toward his body. These talismans exploded into balls of flames amid a string of dull thumps, then transformed into several large runs that vanished into his body in a flash. Han Li gave a muffled groan as golden light swept over his face, and his aura swelled slightly before immediately returning to a stable condition. Moments later, he exhaled and finally opened his eyes. "I've managed to repress everything for now. I wonder how things are going on the other end," Han Li murmured to himself as he rose to his feet, then cast his gaze toward a certain direction. Buddhist monk Jin Yue and the white-robed elderly man were most likely still locked in battle against the Zhu Guang clone. Just as Han Li was thinking about what he was going to do next, the space in the distance suddenly tremored violently, following which an earth-shattering boom erupted. The surrounding light barrier was instantly shattered, and the entire spatial formation was destroyed. The 36 male cultivators stumbled out of thin air, and all of them had been dealt heavy blows from the backlash of having the formation destroyed. Han Li's expression changed slightly as he focused his gaze toward that direction, upon which he was greeted by the sight of a massive crimson skeleton that was wreaking havoc with reckless abandon. The skeleton was over 1,000 feet tall and had 3 heads and 6 arms, wielding 6 different heavy black weapons. The 6 devilish weapons were swung through the air in unison, sweeping up gusts of fierce devilish wind. At the top of the skeleton's center head stood the Zhu Guang, who was carrying a huge black seal with one hand. His eyes were tightly shut, and it seemed that he was dedicating all of his efforts to controlling the skeleton beneath him. Up ahead, both the white-robed elderly man and Buddhist monk Jin Yue were in an extremely sorry state. Buddhist monk Jin Yue's golden cassia had been torn to shreds, and a huge crimson handprint had appeared on his chest. The handprint had left an indentation that was over half a foot deep, and it appears that several of his ribs had been pulverized, but there was no blood flowing out of his body. Meanwhile, the white-robed elderly man's face had turned very pale, and the light radiating from the 7-flame fan in his hand had also dimmed significantly. Both of them had several treasures flying around them, forming layers of light barriers that shielded them within, but in the face of the fierce devilish winds, the light barriers were displaying clear signs of strain and looked as if they could crumble at any moment. It was quite clear that the crimson skeleton had been responsible for destroying the spatial restriction. Han Li's expression darkened slightly upon seeing this. This final Zhu Guang clone seemed to be far more powerful than he had anticipated. Even so, his expression remained completely unchanged, and an object suddenly appeared in his hand, which was concealed within his sleeve. Following the disappearance of the restriction, the 3 combatants naturally caught sight of Han Li. Expressions of elation immediately appeared on the faces of the white-robed elderly man and Buddhist monk Jin Yue, while a bewildered look appeared in Zhu Guang's eyes. They had only been separated from Han Li and the burly devilish man for a short time, but now Han Li was completely unscathed, while the burly man was nowhere to be seen. Zhu Guang was well aware of just how powerful the burly man was. Even his true body may not be able to kill the burly man. As such, he immediately arrived at the conclusion that there was no way that Han Li could have killed the burly man, and he hurriedly swept his gaze through the surrounding area. "Fellow Taoist Han, please come and assist us." After failing to sense the burly devilish man's aura, Zhu Guang swept his spiritual sense toward Han Li, following which the giant crimson skull beneath him immediately lashed out toward Han Li with its 6 devilish weapons. A gust of fierce devilish wind swept forth, and within the gust of black wind were over 1,000 devilish weapon projections of different descriptions. It was clear that Zhu Guang had sensed just how feeble Han Li's aura currently was, and he immediately made an attempt to kill Han Li on the spot. Indeed, this attack was extremely powerful, and it would not be an easy task for Han Li to withstand it in his current state. However, he remained completely unflustered and merely swept a sleeve through the air to release an inky black bracelet, which in turn released countless golden flowers. These golden flowers circled around before transforming into over 10,000 fist-sized golden beetles, all of which were extremely ferocious in appearance. These were none other than Han Li's mature gold-devouring beetles. Even though Han Li's physical body and magic power were both in a severely depleted state, his spiritual sense was still close to its peak condition, so he was able to control all of these gold-devouring beetles with relative ease. The gold-devouring beetles converged to form a golden cloud at his behest, then positioned themselves in front of Han Li like a massive shield. The devilish containing the countless weapon projections struck the wall of golden beetles amid a resounding boom, but the wall refused to budge and managed to keep the devilish winds at bay. Zhu Guang's expression changed slightly upon seeing this, yet before he had a chance to do anything, Han Li suddenly pointed a finger toward him and instructed, "Go." The golden wall of beetles immediately split up into a buzzing swarm, and after just a few flashes, it had reached the crimson skeletons. "Gold-devouring beetles," Zhu Guang exclaimed as his expression changed drastically. The skeleton beneath him immediately hurled its weapons toward the swarm of beetles at his behest, and the weapons transformed into 6 giant black pythons mid-flight. As for Zhu Guang himself, he hurriedly stomped a foot down onto the skeleton's head, and a gust of fierce crimson wind was swept up, carrying both him and the skeleton rapidly away into the distance. A string of resounding booms rang out as the 6 giant black pythons plunged into the golden swarm of beetles, only to completely vanish after just a few flashes. The swarm of beetles then transformed into a giant black falcon that flapped its wings vigorously and shot forth in pursuit as an incredibly fast streak of golden light. The white-robed elderly man and Buddhist monk Jin Yue were naturally ecstatic to see this, and the former hurriedly said, "Use that thing right now. This is the perfect opportunity." "My thoughts exactly," Buddhist monk Jin Yue replied without any hesitation before flipping both hands over to reveal 2 halves of a silk handkerchief. The handkerchief was yellow with age, and there were some dirty runes inscribed on its surface, giving it the appearance of a filthy old rag. However, the 2 elders were regarding it as if it were a priceless treasure. As soon as the item was summoned, Buddhist monk Jin Yue began to chant something before tossing the 2 halves of the handkerchief in Zhu Guang's direction. 2 balls of gray light rose up into the air, then combined together to form a Taicha diagram, which then vanished into thin air in a flash. The sky darkened as countless black clouds instantly appeared in the air, and a rumbling thunderclap rang out, following which the clouds parted to reveal a Taicha diagram the size of a small city, encompassing an area down below that was over 1,000 acres in size. Regardless of whether it was the fleeing Zhu Guang or the other devilish beings beneath the diagram, all of them immediately became extremely slow and sluggish. However, this type of restrictive power wasn't anywhere near significant for devilish lords, and they were able to brush it off by simply circulating their magic power throughout their bodies. As for Zhu Guang, he was barely slowed down at all before accelerating back to his original speed. However, right at this moment, the white-robed elderly man and Buddhist monk Jin Yue both began to chant something, and their voices reverberated over the entire battlefield. In the next instant, the giant Taicha diagram shrank down to only around an acre in size with Zhu Guang situated right at its very center. Countless 5-colored runes then surged out of the diagram in a frenzy. It was as if the diagram had suddenly attained a substantial form. The condensed Taicha diagram revolved in midair before crashing down toward Zhu Guang as countless layers of projection, and Zhu Guang felt the air tighten around himself as countless bursts of enormous force came compressing toward him from all sides, stopping him cold in his tracks. The tremendous force then formed a massive vortex that swept up both Zhu Guang and the massive skeleton beneath him, threatening to tear them both into countless pieces. "This is profound heavenly holy artifact," Zhu Guang exclaimed as he hurriedly tossed the large black seal in his hand upward. The seal immediately swelled to the size of a pavilion, then released countless streaks of black light that hurtled directly toward the Taicha diagram. The Taicha diagram tremored slightly as a resounding boom rang out, but it was able to repel the huge seal without much difficulty. However, Zhu Guang didn't seem to depend on the seal to break the restriction, and he quickly twisted around before vanishing into the crimson skeleton down below. In the next instant, the 3 heads of the skeleton opened their mouths to expel 3 items, consisting of a black talisman, a purple jade pendant, and a crimson ball of light. The three items then exploded in unison, transforming into a plume of black devilish chi, a ball of purple light, and a swathe of thin crimson threads, all of which plunged into the crimson skeleton's body. Devilish patterns of three different colors immediately appeared all over the surface of the skeleton's body, and it let loose a roar of pain. Its body swelled to around twice its original size, allowing it to just barely struggle free of the restrictive force around it. It then brought its 6 weapons together to create a giant scimitar, and green light flashed in its 6 eyes as it lashed out viciously toward the Taicha diagram with the massive scimitar. Letter 1D4 1F, letter 1D563, letter 1D5F2, letter 1D556, letter 1D568, letter 1D5F2, letter 1D5F0, letter 1D698, letter 1D46. A saber projection that was over 1,000 feet in length immediately swept toward the Taicha diagram in a flash, and the diagram was sliced in half in a completely silent manner. The surrounding restrictive force was instantly significantly alleviated, and Zhu Guang was ecstatic as he prepared to flee into the distance again. However, right at this moment, both the white-robed elderly man and Buddhist monk Jin Yue opened their mouths in unison to expel a ball of blood essence each, which transformed into 2 clouds of blood mist that vanished into thin air. At the same time, several unfamiliar auras arose from within the Taicha diagram that had just been sliced in half, and it instantly regenerated to its original condition before rapidly rotating on the spot again. At this point, the giant crimson skeleton had only just risen less than 200 feet into the air when it was struck by a renewed burst of tremendous force that sent it crashing down onto the ground again. Zhu Guang was naturally furious to see this, and the crimson skeleton swung its devilish scimitar repeatedly through the air at his behest, sending huge black saber formation sweeping upward to destroy the Taicha diagram over and over again. However, regardless of how much damage the Taicha diagram sustained, it would instantly regenerate amid flashes of spiritual light, thereby preventing the crimson skeleton from being able to escape. In order to fuel its regeneration, the white-robed elderly man and Buddhist monk Jin Yue were forced to expel one mouthful of blood essence after another, and as they did so, their physical bodies were becoming shriveled up at a rate that was discernible to the naked eye. It was clear that they were truly giving it their all. Zhu Guang was naturally very bewildered by this situation, and he immediately gritted his teeth, upon which 4 of the crimson skeleton, 6 arms exploded into clouds of blood mist at his behest. The clouds of mist then transformed into a pair of giant bone wings on the skeleton's back, and its 2 remaining hands began to make a series of hand seals as it flapped its wings vigorously. Its giant body swayed slightly, and it began to rise up into the air again. All of this had taken place in what seemed like the mere blink of an eye, but it was already too late. The giant golden falcon that was the swarm of gold-devouring beetles finally reached the crimson skeleton, then came crashing down toward it with ferocious might. The crimson skeleton let loose a panicked roar as it hurriedly slashed its devilish scimitar toward the giant golden falcon. At the same time, it flapped its wings with all its might and sped up significantly as a result. The restrictive power being unleashed by the Taicha diagram meant that it was still far slower than its initial speed. Upon being struck by the giant black saber projection, the golden falcon immediately disintegrated into over 10,000 golden flowers, and the crimson skeleton was immediately inundated by gold-devouring beetles amid a howl of anguish. Fist-sized golden beetles were crawling over every single inch of its body, and the sound of its bones being scraped and devoured was truly the stuff of nightmares. This crimson skeleton was something that sacred ancestor Zhu Guang had manifested from a powerful treasure, but it was no match for the swarm of gold-devouring beetles, and its body was being devoured at an incredible rate. Within the span of just a few breaths, close to half of its body was gone, and it clearly wasn't going to be able to last much longer. The white-robed elderly man and Buddhist monk Jin Yue were ecstatic to see this. I didn't think that fellow Taoist Han would be able to control so many mature gold-devouring beetles at once, the white-robed elderly man said in an elated voice. Indeed, and thank heavens we resisted the urge to use that disposable holy artifact that Master Mo Jianli bestowed upon us. Otherwise, that sacred ancestor clone would have most likely been able to escape. Right at this moment, Han Li flew over to the crimson skeleton, then stopped on the spot and merely appraised the situation in a completely expressionless manner. Meanwhile, Zhu Guang was concealed within the crimson skeleton, looking out at the swarm of gold-devouring beetles with a horrified expression. At this point, the The crimson skeleton had already been reduced to only several tens of feet in size, and it would no longer be able to protect him for long. All of a sudden, he gritted his teeth and made a hand seal, upon which an earth-shattering boom rang out, and what remained of the crimson skeleton exploded into a ball of crimson light, sending all of the gold-devouring beetles flying back through the force of the explosion. However, around a dozen of these beetles were able to advance through the shockwaves, and they instantly pounced onto Zhu Guang's body before sinking their fangs into him with reckless abandon. These were the 13 purple-striped gold-devouring beetles that Han Li had nurtured, and he had snuck them into the swarm of gold-devouring beetles. Their auras were virtually identical to those of normal mature gold-devouring beetles, so they were able to avoid being detected by Zhu Guang. Zhu Guang was immediately struck by a sense of excruciating pain, but he knew that this was his last opportunity to escape. As such, he could only repress his agony and ignore the purple-striped gold-devouring beetles as he shot forth through the air as a streak of crimson light, and after just a single flash, he was about to escape outside of the area encompassed by the Taichai diagram. However, Han Li wasn't concerned in the slightest to see this, and the reason for his composure was quickly made apparent. In the next instant, golden light flashed ahead of the streak of crimson light, and a dozen or so golden beastly projections appeared, along with a swathe of countless claw projections. A string of explosions rang out, and the beastly projections were all sent flying and revealed to have originated from a small golden beast. But as a result, the crimson streak of light was stalled for a moment, and that was enough for the swarm of gold-devouring beetles to completely inundate him once again. A blood-curdling howl rang out as Zhu Guang desperately made a series of hand seals, releasing gusts of fierce crimson winds and bursts of inky black devilish qi. But regardless of what type of ability he unleashed, the gold-devouring beetles continued to cling to his body and refused to let go. In the face of these indestructible gold-devouring beetles, Zhu Guang was completely at their mercy, and mere moments later, his body was completely devoured. Even his nascent soul hadn't managed to escape. The swarm of gold-devouring beetles then dispersed and quickly flew back up Han Li's sleeve. Only then did a relieved look finally appear on his face, and the Taichai diagram in the distance also disintegrated into specks of spiritual light. However, the white-robed elderly man and Buddhist monk Jin Yue both coughed up a few more mouthfuls of blood, and their bodies became even more wizened and shriveled. In contrast with their physical conditions, both of them wore ecstatic expressions. The white-robed elderly man chortled with glee as he asked, "Ha, that sacred ancestor clone is finally dead. Fellow Taoist Han, did you manage to kill that devilish lord as well?" "I did. He was a very troublesome opponent, but I managed to kill him in the end," Han Li replied with a faint smile. "You have truly made an unmatched contribution in this battle and sealed our victory, fellow Taoist Han." The white-robed elderly man became even more ecstatic upon hearing this, and he abruptly took a deep breath before letting loose a thunderous roar. "Devilish scum, your sacred ancestor has already been slain. The only fate that awaits all of you is death." His voice rumbled throughout the entire battlefield like an explosive thunderclap, and it was clearly audible to all human, demonic, and devilish beings. The human and demons all cheered with elation as morale was instantly boosted significantly, while the opposite was true for the devilish army. The devilish lords immediately turned their attention toward the white-robed elderly man, and their hearts were filled with astonishment upon seeing the absence of the Zhu Guang clone and the burly devilish lord. The white-robed elderly man and Buddhist monk Jin Yue then immediately rushed toward the battle that was taking place closest to them. This was a battle between two Deep Heaven City elders and two devilish lords, and the latter's expressions changed drastically as they exchanged a bewildered glance. "Run!" one of the devilish lords, who was an azure-armored elderly man, roared. The other devilish lord was entirely enveloped in black qi, and he harumphed coldly as he rubbed his hands together before thrusting them forward. A loud boom rang out as countless bolts of black lightning erupted forth, thereby temporarily forcing back the two human elders. Immediately thereafter, the devilish lord released an inky black canoe, which he flew onto in a flash before instantly fleeing the scene. As for the azure-armored elderly man, he had already summoned an azure flag, and he swept it through the air to release a burst of azure light that completely inundated his body. The devilish lord vanished amid a flash of azure light, then re-emerged amid a burst of spatial fluctuations several thousand feet away before disappearing yet again. The two devilish lords had fled without any hesitation. The two Deep Heaven City elders who were battling them were naturally unwilling to let them escape, and they immediately prepared to set off in pursuit once the black lightning was nullified. However, the white-robed elderly man and Buddhist monk Jin Yue immediately urged them not to go. The white-robed elderly man's lips tremored as he transmitted his voice to the two elders. "Don't worry about those retreating devilish lords. Help out our other fellow Taoists first." Immediately thereafter, he changed directions and flew toward another battle. The two elders were instantly enlightened upon hearing this, and they also went to assist other allies. In the blink of an eye, the entire devilish army had been plunged into complete turmoil. Many of the devilish lords were already fleeing the scene, while some of the more stubborn ones tried to continue onward, only to be surrounded by multiple human and demon body integration cultivators at once, and some of them were slain on the spot, while others were forced to flee after sustaining severe injuries. Without the presence of the devilish lords, the low-grade devilish beings on the battlefield naturally flew into a blind panic, and they also began to retreat in a horrified frenzy. The humans and demons had also suffered severe casualties, but their morale was at an all-time high as they rushed forward in hot pursuit. Thus, countless devilish beings began to rush away from Deep Heaven City, pursued by all types of attacks that felled those who were lagging behind like flies. None of the body integration cultivators of the city joined in on this effort. They merely looked on as the entire devilish army crumbled before their eyes. Shortly thereafter, the entire devilish army had been chased far away from Deep Heaven City, and all of them heaved a collective sigh of relief. The battle had truly been won now. At this point, even if another sacred ancestor clone were to descend upon this battlefield, they wouldn't be able to reverse the situation. Hanli stayed around for a while longer before flying back into the city with the leopard Kirin beast. The entire city had already been made aware of the devilish army's defeat, and everyone was celebrating on the streets to express their elation. Thus, the city had suddenly become a very lively and bustling place, and even Han Li was feeling very gratified upon seeing this. However, he displayed no intention of stopping as he continued to fly back to his own abode. Not long after that, he reached the stone pagoda before flying into it without any hesitation. Instead of returning to the top floor, he went directly to the secret chamber that was over 1,000 feet below the stone pagoda. He activated the restrictions there, then issued the leopard Kirin beast a few instructions before immediately going into a meditative state. His energy reserves were severely depleted, and there were all types of conflicting medicinal power within his body. As such, it was naturally best to address the situation as soon as possible, which was why he had returned early to go into seclusion. As for the human and demonic army, they were led by a group of body integration cultivators and pursued the fleeing devilish army for 3 days and 3 nights. During this process, they slew next to no devilish lords, but around 50% to 60% of the low-grade and mid-grade devilish beings had been wiped out. This had been a truly crushing victory for Deep Heaven City, and embarked on a return journey in extremely high spirits. Of course, the elders had sent out a lot of scouts to spy on the rest of the devilish army, in case they decided to launch another attack. Once they returned to the city, all of the people who had participated in the battle received an extremely warm welcome, and a massive feast was arranged in celebration. Unbeknownst to the vast majority of the city, the Deep Heaven City elders hadn't participated in the celebrations. Instead, they were having a secret meeting in a certain secluded hall with some other body integration cultivators, some of which were obscure cultivators who had been in seclusion in the city for many years, while others were reinforcements sent to Deep Heaven City by the Holy Island. All of the body integration cultivators were currently listening with stunned expressions, as the white-robed elderly man recounted how the Zhu Guang clone had been devoured by Han Li's gold-devouring beetles. To think that he was able to nurture over 10,000 mature gold-devouring beetles, that's incredible. So this fellow Taoist Han was responsible for killing both the Zhu Guang clone and the late body integration stage devilish lord, who was far more powerful even than a sacred ancestor clone. A burly man with a heavy black beard murmured. In all honesty, I'm quite embarrassed. I wasn't able to do much in this battle at all. My greatest contribution was trapping the sacred ancestor clone for a while with fellow Taoist Jin Yue's assistance, but we wouldn't have been able to kill the clone had it not been for fellow Taoist Han's gold-devouring beetles. On top of that, fellow Taoist Han had already slain that other late-body integration stage devilish lord before that. the white-robed elderly man said with a wry smile. You're being far too self-critical, Brother Gu. Without the treasure unleashed by you and fellow Taoist Jin, it would have been very difficult for fellow Taoist Han's gold-devouring beetles to hunt down that sacred ancestor clone, a green-haired elderly man countered. That treasure was something that Master Mo Jianli had bestowed upon us. I wouldn't dare to take credit for something like that, the white-robed elderly man said as he shook his head emphatically. Without the huge amount of blood essence that you and fellow Taoist Jin had expended, the treasure wouldn't have been able to take effect. Your contributions are far more significant than you proclaim them to be. If even your contributions don't count for anything, then the rest of us would have done less than nothing, the green-haired elderly man chuckled. At this moment, a woman in a long blue dress said with a smile, even setting that aside, the extensive planning done by you two prior to this battle is an extremely significant contribution. Having said that, judging from your description of this fellow Taoist Han's powers, he definitely ranks among the top 5 most powerful beings among our two races. I certainly can't leave without meeting someone like him. Where is he currently staying right now? Indeed, I would also like to meet him, someone else immediately chimed in. Fellow Taoist Han has expended a lot of energy during this battle, so he went into seclusion as soon as he returned to the city. That's why he's not present at this meeting, and this is most likely not a good time to try and meet him, the white-robed elderly man said. Ah, forgive me for being overeager. In that case, we'll pay fellow Taoist Han a visit once he comes out of seclusion, the woman said as a slightly forlorn look appeared on her face. The other elders wishing to meet Han Li were also rather disappointed to hear this, but they naturally couldn't press the issue any further. Fellow Taoist Han has made the most significant contribution in this battle, but it was thanks to everyone's collective efforts that our city was able to survive this ordeal. I won't cheapen your efforts by extending any words of gratitude. Just know that if you ever need assistance from our city, we'll be sure to oblige, the white-robed elderly man said as he cupped his fist in a salute, and his words were echoed by the other elders of the city. The other body integration cultivators were quite elated to hear this. After all, a promise from the elders of Deep Heaven City was a very valuable intangible asset. We may have won this battle, but we can't get complacent. After all, close to the half the devilish army and almost all of the devilish lords have survived. If that sacred ancestor Zhu Guang decides to bite the bullet and send another one of his clones into the spirit realm, we'll most likely have another grueling battle on our hands. If we want to prevent that happening, we have to take advantage of this opportunity to launch a counterattack and wipe out the remaining devilish army. We can't afford them any chance of making a resurgence, the white-robed elderly man said as a cold look appeared in his eyes. Everyone else immediately nodded in agreement, and thus, the Deep Heaven City elders quickly assigned a series of missions, sending out most of the body integration stage beings present to continue hunting down the devilish army. The rest of them remain behind and oversee the repair of all of the damaged formations and restrictions. Of course, the most important thing was to send out some people to destroy the nearby devilish nodes right away. If they could do that, then even if the devilish beings were to send reinforcements, they wouldn't be able to arrive near Deep Heaven City. These were all extremely urgent matters, so as soon as the assignment of these tasks were completed, everyone took their leave to carry out their respective duties. Thus, the only 2 people left in the hall were the white-robed elderly man and the green-haired elderly man, the latter of whom was one of the Holy Island envoys. The 2 conversed with one another for a long while before departing, and following their conversation, the white-robed elderly man seemed to be in high spirits, indicating that he had received some type of good news from the Holy Island envoy. Not long after that, a significant chunk of the remaining devilish army in the nearby area was slain under the efforts of the Deep Heaven City body integration cultivators. However, the remnants of the devilish army had been led away by the devilish lords and joined other devilish armies in neighboring areas. Thus, the human and demonic cultivators naturally didn't dare to pursue them any further, and they returned to the city after setting up a large number of watchtowers on the borders. Thus, the Battle of Deep Heaven City had finally drawn to a true conclusion. Deep Heaven City had secured the final victory, but as many as a third of their defensive forces had been destroyed in the process. There were even a few body integration elders who had perished during the battle, as well as countless casualties among cultivators at or below the spatial tempering stage. Thankfully, they had managed to crush the devilish army and wipe out a considerable number of devilish beings, thereby securing the first major victory since the commencement of the devilish tribulation. Of course, Deep Heaven City's victory didn't mean that the human and demonic races had actually gained the upper hand. On the contrary, the situation was only becoming more and more desperate for the other major human settlements. As for whether they would also be able to turn the tables, only the heavens knew the answer to that. Following Deep Heaven City's victory, many vagrant cultivators and remnants of cultivating families and sects converged to join the city. There were even vagrant cultivators and small powers from neighboring areas that were willing to take the risk to flee toward Deep Heaven City, and as a result, the cultivators that the city had lost during the battle were easily replenished. Even if another devilish army were to turn up soon, Deep Heaven City would be well equipped to fight them. Thus, Deep Heaven City was accumulating power as quickly as it could, and a year passed by in the blink of an eye. On this day, a special guest arrived at the stone pagoda that Han Li was living. Hai Yueshan and Qi Lingzi immediately invited the guest into the hall on the top floor of the stone pagoda, and as soon as the guest took a seat, he said to Qi Lingzi, "I have an urgent matter to discuss with your master. Inform him of my arrival." Qi Lingzi was feeling rather uneasy, but he still replied, "Forgive me, senior, but master is currently in seclusion and told us that he wouldn't be entertaining any guests." "It's all right, I arranged this meeting with your master well in advance. Just inform him of my arrival. Fellow Taoist Han won't blame you for this," the guest said in an aloof and nonchalant manner. Qi Lingzi hesitated momentarily upon hearing this, but he knew that this guest was no ordinary body integration cultivator, so he could only agree to this request in the end. "In that case, I'll do as you say, senior." Thus, he flipped a hand over to summon a voice transmission talisman, then said something into it before letting it loose. Han Li had been in seclusion for an entire year in the secret chamber beneath the stone pagoda, and all of a sudden, golden light flashed from his body as he slowly opened his eyes. At this point, he was close to returning to his peak condition, and he made a grabbing motion to draw a streak of light into his grasp out of thin air. He swept his spiritual sense into the object, then murmured to himself, "So it's him. Looks like I really will have to come out to meet him. Letter 1D4 1F, letter 1D4 2B, letter 1D5 56, letter 1D5 F2, letter 1D6 04, letter 1D6 AT, letter 1D5 54, letter 1D5 60, letter 1D4 6. As soon as his voice trailed off, he stood up from his futon, then flew out of the secret chamber as a streak of azure light. Moments later, the azure light faded at the center of the hall on the top floor of the stone pagoda, revealing Han Li within it. "We pay our respects to Master." Qi Lingzi and Hai Yueshan immediately extended ecstatic bows toward him. "No need for formalities. Brother Long, you seem to have arrived far earlier than the time we agreed on. Aren't you afraid that the devilish army will take advantage of your absence to destroy your Long family stronghold?" Han Li asked. The guest was none other than the Long family patriarch, and he was currently appraising Han Li with a hint of astonishment in his eyes. "I naturally made ample preparations before I departed the stronghold. I had heard that you had slain a sacred ancestor clone and a late body integration stage devilish lord in the battle that took place a year ago. At the time, I was rather skeptical, but it seems that I was wrong to have my doubts. Your rate of progression truly puts me to shame, fellow Taoist Han. Having said that, you've instilled me with even greater confidence in the journey we're going to make. As for why I arrived here earlier than expected, that's because some unexpected circumstances arose. I was only able to make such quick progress as I had encountered some unique opportunities during the past few years. As for slaying that sacred ancestor clone, I was only able to do so after receiving a lot of assistance from fellow Taoist Gu and the others," Han Li explained in a nonchalant manner. "In any case, it's a matter of immense pride to be able to kill a sacred ancestor clone. On top of that, you've only just progressed to the late body integration stage, so you'll only become more powerful as you consolidate your cultivation base. Even now, I'm most likely already no match for you," the Long family patriarch sighed. "Hee, you're being far too modest, Brother Long. Can you tell me what those unforeseen circumstances that you were referring to are?" Han Li chuckled in response. "That's a long story," the Long family patriarch said as he cast a hesitant gaze toward Qi Lingzi and Hai Yueshan. Han Li was immediately able to read between the lines, and he turned to his two disciples and instructed, "You two can leave for now." "Yes, master." The two of them naturally had no objections and departed from the hall. After that, Han Li swept a sleeve through the air to release a streak of azure light that vanished in a flash, and in the next instant, A layer of white light appeared to encompass the entire hall. "All right, there's no one else here aside from the two of us now. Go ahead, Brother Long," Han Li said with a smile. Long family patriarch nodded as a solemn look appeared on his face. "As you may have already guessed, we're going to have to enter the Elder Devil realm earlier than planned. I received news that our two races are going to be launching a counterattack against the devilish army in the next few years, and the devilish patriarchs will also be descending into our spirit realm. Regardless of what the outcome of that battle is, we most likely won't have a chance to enter the Elder Devil realm. As such, if we don't want to miss this opportunity, then our only option would be to enter the Elder Devil realm prior to the commencement of this battle." The three devilish patriarchs. Han Li's expression changed slightly upon hearing this. "So you've heard of them as well. These three patriarchs are the most powerful of the elder devils, and normal sacred ancestors are completely incomparable to them. I heard that many of the grand ascension stage beings from foreign races in our spirit realm have fallen by their hands," the Long family patriarch said in a grim voice. Han Li's expression also darkened upon hearing this, and a contemplative look appeared in his eyes. The Long family patriarch remained silent and waited for Han Li's response. Only after a long while did Han Li break the silence again. "According to my knowledge, the three devilish patriarchs never leave the Elder Devil realm. Even those foreign race grand ascension stage beings only perish by their hands after venturing into the Elder Devil race. Are you sure that they're going to be descending into the spirit realm?" "Are you suspecting me of falsehood, Brother Han?" the Long family patriarch asked. "No, it's just that what you're saying is a very important piece of information, so I have to verify it," Han Li replied. "In that case, you can rest assured, fellow Taoist Han. I received this information from the Holy Island, and it was revealed by Senior Ao Zio of the demon race," the Long family patriarch said. Han Li was quite surprised to hear this, and he hurriedly asked, "Senior Ao Zio went to the Holy Island?" "Not only did Senior Ao Zio go to the Holy Island, he's going to be staying there until the true battle against the devilish beings commences," the Long family patriarch said in a grim voice. "So that means the rumors of the devilish patriarchs descending into our spirit realm are most likely true. In that case, all of our plans will be heavily affected," Han Li sighed. "Indeed, we had already planned to enter the Elder Devil realm after the most ferocious attacks from the devilish army had passed by, but if the devilish patriarchs are going to be descending into this realm, then things will be a lot more troublesome. When that time comes, Senior Ao Zio, Senior Mo Jianli, and the Holy Island will be the keys to the battle. If our two races are defeated, then we'll have no choice but to flee and hand over this territory. As a result, our plan of entering the Elder Devil realm will be completely thrown out the window. If we were to win the battle, then all of the devilish beings will retreat back to the Elder Devil realm. If that happens, the spatial nodes will be rife with high-grade devilish beings, and that would also make it very difficult for us to sneak through. If the devilish patriarchs were to descend into our realm, then our risk would be reduced to a minimum. From that perspective, it's a very good thing for us that the devilish patriarchs are planning to descend into the spirit realm," the Long family patriarch said with a wry smile. "We can only think like that now. Have you informed our fellow Taoists from the spirit race about this, Brother Long?" Han Li asked. "It's not that easy to get into contact with the spirit race, so I haven't had time to tell them yet, but as long as we have no issues here, there shouldn't be any issues with them, either. The devilish beings aren't just targeting our human and demon races, they're targeting all of the nearby foreign races as well, so the decision that they make will most likely be the same as ours," the Long family patriarch said in a confident manner. "I see. Would you be able to give me 2 days to ponder this issue before I get back to you?" Han Li asked after a brief pause for contemplation. He, of course. I'll be returning to hear you reply in 2 days then, fellow Taoist Han," the Long family patriarch agreed with a smile. "I'll be sure to give you a definitive answer in 2 days. However, prior to that, would you be able to tell me about what the devilish beings have been doing over on your end?" Han Li suddenly changed the subject. The Long family patriarch nodded in response. "I don't know about what they're doing elsewhere, but our stronghold was attacked a few times by the devilish army. Thankfully, we were able to keep them at bay. However, if it weren't for the fact that the Holy Sovereign City had attracted the majority of the devilish army, our stronghold would have been in some peril. It seems that the devilish army in that area intends to focus its power on conquering the Holy Sovereign City, then wipe out the rest of the nearby human settlements. Fortunately, The Holy Sovereign City has managed to hold its own against the devilish army, and Han Li listened intently to what the Long family patriarch had to say and occasionally raised a few questions, all of which were answered by the Long family patriarch to the best of his abilities. Han Li was very pleased with this information, and the two of them chatted for a while longer before the Long family patriarch departed. Han Li accompanied him to the gate of the hall before suddenly asking in a seemingly nonchalant manner, "By the way, would you happen to know if Senior Ao Zio is on the Holy Island by himself, or if he's there with one of his descendants? I'm not sure exactly who it is, but I heard that Senior Ao is indeed being accompanied by one of his descendants. Why do you ask, fellow Taoist Han?" The Long family patriarch asked with a peculiar look in his eyes. "No particular reason," Han Li replied with an ambiguous chuckle. The Long family patriarch obviously wasn't convinced, but this had nothing to do with him, so he naturally wasn't going to pry any further. Thus, he cupped his fist in a salute toward Han Li before flying out of the stone pagoda as a streak of golden light. Following the Long family patriarch's departure, Han Li returned to the hall, where his two disciples were already waiting for him. "Have you encountered some trouble, Master? Is there anything we can help you with?" Hai Yueshan asked. "If it's something that you can help me resolve, then it wouldn't be considered as trouble to me," Han Li replied in an indifferent manner. "If only we had progressed further in our cultivation, we would be of more use to Master," Qi Lingzi said with a shameful expression. "You two already possess exceptional cultivation aptitude. Otherwise, you wouldn't have progressed to this point in such a short time. It's just that the issue at hand is extremely perilous even for body integration cultivators, so it's only normal that you two are unable to contribute in any way. All right, that's enough of that matter. Tell me about the current situation in Deep Heaven City. Have the remnants of the devilish army been wiped out?" Han Li asked with a serious expression. Qi Lingzi immediately launched into a recount of events in response. "After you went into seclusion, Senior Gu and the others only returned to the city to recuperate for a short while before immediately undertaking a series of tasks." After Qi Lingzi had recounted all of the important events that had taken place in the city, Han Li nodded in response before asking about the Ice Phoenix. Senior Ice Phoenix seemed to have attained the catalyst for a breakthrough, and she immediately went into seclusion after the devilish army was wiped out. According to her, she'll be in seclusion for at least several months, but no more than a year, Hai Yueshan replied. Fellow Taoist Ice Phoenix possesses outstanding aptitude with her heavenly Phoenix bloodline, so it's no surprise that she's gleaned something during the battle. Stay in the pagoda during this time and make sure that no one interrupts her seclusion, Han Li said with a pleased look in his eyes. "Yes, Master." "All right, you two can go now," Han Li instructed with a content nod. "We'll leave you to rest then, Master." Qi Lingzi and Hai Yueshan extended a deep bow before exiting the hall. Just as the two of them had made it to the entrance of the hall, a thought suddenly occurred to Han Li, and he instructed, "By the way, don't tell anyone that fellow Taoist Long came to visit me today." The two disciples, hearts stirred upon hearing this, and they naturally gave an affirmative response. Thus, Han Li was the only one left in the hall. He sat on his chair with his chin resting one of his hands, and a contemplative look appeared on his face. Over half a year later, a group of devilish beings with black chi surging all over their bodies were attacking a group of 7 or 8 human cultivators in the air above a certain mountain range. The two sides appeared to be evenly matched, so the battle was extremely fierce. All of a sudden, spiritual light flashed in the distant sky, and a streak of 5-colored light appeared before hurtling onto the scene in a flash. The devils and humans down below didn't know whether this was a friend or a foe, so they all stopped and quickly retreated. Right at this moment, a pleasant young female voice rang out from within the 5-colored streak of light. "I guess it wouldn't be right of me to not give you all a hand." As soon as her voice trailed off, the streak of light paused in the air above the group of devilish beings for a moment. Immediately thereafter, countless threads of 5-colored light came raining down from above, instantly destroying the bodies of the devilish beings. "Thank you, Senior." The human cultivators were ecstatic to see this, but the 5-colored streak of light merely continued on its way and quickly vanished into the distance, seemingly completely disinterested in receiving their gratitude. The group of human cultivators exchanged a few bewildered glances, and following a brief conversation, all of them departed as well. Not long after that, spatial fluctuations suddenly erupted up above, and 2 more humanoid figures appeared. One of them was a fierce-looking burly man in a suit of black armor, while the other was a slender woman in a white palatial dress. Both of their bodies were covered in a thin layer of pink mist, making it impossible to glean their facial features. "Mistress, would you like me to kill that group of human cultivators?" the black-armored man asked as a hint of killing intent appeared in his eyes. "There's no need to do that. All we have to do is follow this woman," the woman in white replied with a calm shake of her head. "But mistress, we've followed this woman for around a year already, and it hasn't yielded any fruits. Could it be that your initial divination was incorrect somehow?" the black-armored man asked in a hesitant voice. "It's quite common for errors to occur during this type of divination, but I was very successful on this occasion. As soon as I saw this woman, I was sure that she's the one I need to follow in order to find the spirit medicine that'll heal me, or take me to the person who possesses such a spirit medicine. This is certainly much better than stumbling around aimlessly in the vast human territory," the woman replied. The black-armored immediately gave an affirmative reply upon hearing this, and the woman swept a sleeve through the air to release a burst of pink light, upon which both of them vanished on the spot. Meanwhile, on a tall mountain in the spirit race territory, there were 3 body integration stage holy spirits surrounding a handsome young man. The young man wore a long golden robe, and was facing the trio in an expressionless manner with his hands clasped behind his back. There was a huge shimmering golden lotus flower embroidered on the front of his robes that was extremely eye-catching. The mountain down below was riddled with pits and craters, within which there were over 1,000 sets of remains. There were also countless fragments of treasures littered all over the ground, all of which were completely devoid of luster. "I don't care who you are. You've committed an unforgivable crime by killing so many of our brethren and absorbing their essence. The 3 of us are going to make sure you suffer a terrible death." One of the holy spirits, a short and stubby elderly man, spat through gritted teeth. The other 2 holy spirits consisted of a long-haired elderly man holding a green bamboo cane, and a young beauty who appeared to be in her 30s. All 3 of them were praising the golden-robed young man, with fiery rage in their eyes. In contrast with other races, it was very difficult for spirit beings to attain intelligence. Thus, their population had always been quite low, so every member of the race was held in very high regard. Thankfully, spirit beings who managed to attain intelligence would immediately attain significant power as well, so even the weakest intelligent spirit beings were at the core formation stage or nascent soul stage. This was how they had managed to coexist alongside the neighboring foreign races. This ancestral cloud mountain was quite a renowned spirit race settlement, and these 3 holy spirits were the settlement's grand elders. A few days ago, they had to go out to do something, and when they returned, they immediately discovered that all of their brethren in the entire settlement had been slaughtered, and their essence had all been devoured as well. On top of that, the perpetrator had lingered here even after committing such a heinous deed. How could the 3 holy spirits not be enraged? The golden-robed young man's aura didn't appear to be all that powerful, but the 3 holy spirits were completely unable to ascertain his exact cultivation base. This made them quite uneasy, and they were forced to repress their fury rather than attack him right away. "HMPH, to think mere spirit servants like you dare to speak to me in such a rude manner. They should be honored to have their essence absorbed by me. I can see that the 3 of you are far more powerful than the other spirit servants. If you're willing to accept me as your master, I can spare your lives," the golden-robed young man harumphed coldly. "Spirit servants, you're from the true immortal realm," the 3 holy spirits exclaimed in a stunned manner upon hearing this. "Oh, the 3 of you know about this. Could it be that one of you managed to escape into this lower realm from the true immortal realm? That can't be right. You don't possess the power to do something like this. Someone must have revealed this information to you. I wonder who was the one that disclosed this to you. All right, now that you know where I come from, reveal your true forms and pledge your subordination to me. Otherwise, I'll just have to capture you and erase your sentience. It'll be a bit more of a hassle for me, but the outcome will be the same," the golden-robed young man chuckled coldly. The 3 holy spirits' faces paled upon hearing this, and they exchanged a horrified glance. If this golden-robed young man really had descended from the true immortal realm, then the 3 of them would be no match for him. The long-haired elderly man still had a fearful look on his face, but a thought suddenly occurred to him as he yelled, "He's lying. If he really is from the true immortal realm, why would he have made such a loud commotion when killing our brethren? Indeed, I've never heard of a true immortal who was able to descend into our realm. Even if he really is from the true immortal realm, there must be something wrong with him right now. Otherwise, why would he be wasting time speaking to us? We have nothing to fear. The woman chimed in with a cold expression. The golden-robed young man's expression stiffened slightly upon seeing this, and this minor detail didn't go unnoticed. As such, the three holy spirits became even more confident in the verdict they had arrived at, and the short and stubby elderly immediately yelled, "Attack! We can't let this insolent bastard leave this place alive." At the same time, he made a hand seal to summon a white copper mirror, then waved it toward the young man. A white pillar of light immediately shot forth, then swept toward the young man as a sea of flames that was over 1,000 feet tall. The other two holy spirits also sprang into action without any hesitation. One of them swept their bamboo cane forward, and countless green cane projections immediately appeared in the air above the golden-robed young man, encompassing an area that was over 100 acres in size before silently crashing down from above. Meanwhile, the woman flicked her fingers forward in rapid succession to unleash 10 balls of azure light, which transformed into 10 giant azure birds that flew directly toward the young man. The three holy spirits were unconvinced that this young man was from a higher realm, but they knew that he was definitely extremely powerful. As such, they were unleashing their most powerful attacks from the get-go in an attempt to kill this formidable enemy on the spot. Cold light flashed through the golden-robed young man's eyes upon seeing this. Immediately thereafter, he suddenly made a strange hand seal, and a transparent halo abruptly appeared around him, then exploded to create countless golden and silver runes, forming a massive golden and silver barrier that shielded him within. The cane projections up above transformed into countless massive azure logs that came crashing down from above, while the massive azure birds flapped their wings to unleash tens of thousands of azure wind blades at once. As for the sea of white flames, it completely inundated the golden and silver barrier in a flash. The young man appraised the ferocious attacks with a derisive look on his face, then pressed a hand against the barrier as he uttered the word, "Open." A burst of loud rumbling rang out as the golden and silver barrier swelled drastically in size. Each and every golden and silver rune on the barrier instantly expanded to several times their original size and also took on a semi-transparent appearance. All of the giant logs, wind blades, and scorching flames that struck the barrier were instantly repelled without even being able to damage it in the slightest. And the short and stubby elderly man's expression changed upon seeing this, as he immediately pointed a finger toward the sea of flames. A low roar rang out from within the sea of WHT flames, and several fiery kirins were instantly manifested. Each of them was as large as a cow, and there were silver spiritual flames erupting incessantly out of their bodies. Not only did the sea of flames rear up significantly, it also turned silver in color, and the surrounding air temperature spiked dramatically. The long-haired elderly man and the young beauty exchanged a glance before summoning several treasures each. Yet just as they were about to unleash the treasures, the golden-robed young man said in a frosty voice, "Playtime's over. It's time for me to send you on your way." As soon as his voice trailed off, the humanoid figure within the golden and silver barrier instantly vanished, following which the barrier itself immediately crumbled in the face of the sea of silver flames. However, not only were the three holy spirits not elated in the slightest to see this, they immediately formed a triangle with their backs facing one another before spreading their enormous spiritual sense through the surrounding area. Moments later, the long-haired elderly man exclaimed in a slightly panicked manner, "What's going on? My spiritual sense can't detect that man at all." His two companions remained silent, but the strained looks on their faces clearly indicated that they weren't having any luck either. Just as the stubby elderly man was about to say something, a loud thunderclap suddenly rang out, following which countless specks of silver light appeared. Immediately thereafter, the golden-robed young man appeared amid a flash of golden light, then made a nonchalant grabbing motion. The silver specks of light instantly formed a giant net that was several kilometers in size at his behest, and not only did the net encompass all three of the holy lords, it encompassed even the giant mountain down below. Furthermore, the giant silver net seemed to be imbued with some type of special power, as evidenced by the fact that it was giving off a peculiar aura that made the three holy spirits extremely feeble and only able to muster up just over half of their magic power. It's a spirit capturing heavenly net. He really is from the true immortal realm. Run! The stubby elderly man was clearly the most powerful of the three holy spirits, and he sprang into action as soon as he sensed the debilitating effect of the silver net. His body swayed before combining as one with the copper mirror in front him, following which he sped away as a streak of light. The other two holy spirits instantly turned deathly pale upon hearing the term, spirit capturing heavenly net, and they also immediately tried to flee the scene as quickly as they could. The golden-robed young man chuckled coldly. "You're delusional if you think you can still get away." Immediately thereafter, he flipped a hand over to reveal a ball of silver light, which transformed into a dozen or so silver threads that connected with the entire giant silver net. He then made a grabbing motion, and the silver net descended from up above, looking as if it had encompassed the entire heavens. Loud Buddhist chants rang out as countless silver runes surged out of the net in a frenzy, forming a massive starry projection in an instant before plummeting straight down from above. A rumbling boom erupted as everything within a radius of close to 10 kilometers was inundated by piercing silver light. The world's origin chi in the surrounding area instantly became extremely violent, and gray tornadoes were swept up without any warning, destroying everything in their wake. The occasional earth-shattering boom rang out within the giant silver net. The dazzling silver light made it impossible to see what was happening inside. The golden-robed young man controlled the entire giant net with one hand, while his other hand was clasped behind his back in a nonchalant manner, seemingly completely unconcerned that the three holy spirits would escape. Only after around 10 minutes had passed did the commotion taking place within the silver net gradually die down, and in the end, everything fell silent. The golden-robed young man swept his spiritual sense downward, upon which a cold smile appeared on his face, and he made a grabbing motion toward the giant net. The massive silver net instantly crumbled away at his behest, alongside the gray tornadoes and silver light. It was as if everything had been a mere illusion. However, the huge mountain down below was clearly significantly shorter than before, and there were three glowing items hovering in the air above the rubble on the mountain summit. These consisted of an antiquated silver mirror that was around 10 feet in size, a section of bamboo that was over 10 feet tall, and an azure ball of light. A hint of elation appeared on the golden-robed young man's face upon seeing this, and he swept a sleeve downward to release a burst of silver light that drew the items to him in a flash. "Not bad. After I refine these treasures, they'll be of some use to me," the golden-robed young man murmured to himself with a pleased expression as he carefully appraised the three items. "However, this isn't going to be enough. If I can get a few more of these, then I'll be able to use more of my powers." Having said, it seems that there are grand ascension stage beings in this spirit race, and they'll be quite troublesome for me to face in my current state, the young man mused after stowing the items away. After pondering the situation for a while, he seemed to have arrived at a decision, and he flew away as a streak of dazzling golden light. Thus, peace and quiet returned to the surrounding area. However, around an hour following the young man's departure, a ball of red light suddenly flew out from beneath the rubble down below amid a faint buzzing sound. This was a fist-sized ball of light that contained a purple eyeball-like object, and it hovered in midair before turning toward the direction that the golden-robed young man had flown away in. This was clearly a treasure that was being controlled by someone, and it was clearly quite a remarkable treasure considering it had completely escaped the golden-robed young man's detection. All of a sudden, the purple eyeball began to rotate on the spot, following which the light shimmering around it began to fluctuate in brightness, but it didn't make so much as a single sound. Almost at the exact same moment, there was an elderly man with a remarkably youthful set of facial features appraising a white crystal ball with a dark expression. The elderly man was seated on a black wooden chair in a golden palace within a sea of clouds, and a series of images were slowly unfolding on the surface of the crystal ball. The images depicted the golden-robed young man defeating the three holy spirits, and there were some accompanying voices that could be heard as well. When the elderly man heard the young man utter the term spirit servant, his expression immediately changed slightly, but then quickly returned to normal. However, as soon as the golden-robed young man released that giant silver net, the elderly man instantly rose to his feet and exclaimed, "That's a spirit capturing heavenly net. That's impossible. Even someone who's descended from the true immortal realm definitely won't be able to bring such a treasure into this realm." The elderly man's face immediately became twisted with fury and resentment at the mention of the spirit capturing heavenly net. After watching the battle for a while longer, the elderly man seemed to have discovered something, and his expression eased significantly. He began to pace around the room with his hands clasped behind his back as he murmured to himself, "No, this has to the replica. Otherwise, a true spirit capturing heavenly net wouldn't have taken so long to defeat those three. Even so, it seems to still be extremely potent against us spirit beings and can't be ignored. I don't care if this man really did descend from the true immortal realm. We can't allow him to leave our spirit race alive. However, if he really is a true immortal, then it's very unlikely that we'll be able to kill him. It looks like we'll have to use that thing to completely seal him away." After pacing around the room a few more times, the elderly man suddenly stopped before sitting back in his chair as a contemplative look appeared on his face. Meanwhile, in the human race, there was an azure streak of light flying over a mountain range that lay on the border of the Holy Sovereign City and Deep Heaven City. The streak of light was flying at an incredible speed, and it suddenly changed directions before flying down into a secluded valley. After just a single flash, the streak of azure light landed on a giant gray rock, then faded to reveal the azure-robed Han Li. Han Li cast his gaze throughout the surrounding area with a calm expression, then suddenly focused his attention on an ordinary-looking tree with an unblinking gaze. "Hee, I knew this little trick of mine wouldn't be able to fool fellow Taoist Han." A giggling female voice rang out from within the huge tree, following which it blurred and warped before transforming into a burly yellow-robed that was several tens of feet tall. Standing beside the burly man was a beautiful young woman in a five-colored feather dress, and she was appraising Han Li with a wide smile, but there was clearly a hint of astonishment in her eyes. "Greetings, Fairy Yi. Sorry to keep you waiting," Han Li said with a smile as he cupped his fist in a salute. This woman was none other than the matriarch of the Yi family, and Han Li had met her once during the Myriad Spirit Platform gathering. Her powers seemed to be no less formidable than those of the Long family patriarch, so Han Li naturally had to afford her some respect. "I only arrived a few hours before you, so I didn't have to wait too long. I was trying to play a little prank on you using this yellow cloth puppet I recently obtained, but you saw through it right away. It looks like there are some issues with this puppet," the woman said with a smile as she patted the burly yellow-robed man beside her, creating a hollow thumping sound. The burly man was identical to a real human, but it was only a humanoid puppet. "Surely you jest, Fairy Yi. There are no inherent flaws with this puppet. It's simply not of a high enough caliber to fool the likes of me and you," Han Li said with a smile. "Don't underestimate this puppet. It was created by old man Mu Gu, and he assured me that there was a good chance it would be able to fool even body integration cultivators. I didn't think that you would see through it right away. It seems that he was exaggerating. In contrast, it seems the tales that I've heard about your rapid rate of progression certainly weren't exaggerations, fellow Taoist Han," the woman said with a smile. "I encountered some opportunities and was very lucky to have progressed to the late body integration stage, but my powers can't even begin to compare with those of a veteran late body integration cultivator like you, Fairy Yi," Han Li replied in an indifferent manner. "Letter 1D627, letter 1D633, letter 1D626, letter 212F, letter 1D4CC, letter 1D626, letter 1D4B8, letter 1D630, letter 1D4C2. HMPH, you're still trying to placate me by saying something like this. I heard that a sacred ancestor clone and a late body integration stage devilish lord fell by your hands during the same battle. Don't you think you're being too pretentious by saying something like that?" The woman pouted as she rolled her eyes in an unconvinced manner. "Those are just exaggerated stories. I was only able to kill those powerful opponents as I had received assistance from other fellow Taoists. Otherwise, my powers wouldn't have been anywhere near enough to achieve such a feat," Han Li chuckled in an ambiguous manner. The woman's pout became even more pronounced upon hearing this. "HMPH, do you think I'll believe you?" Han Li merely smiled and remained silent. Seeing as Han Li didn't want to continue on this subject, the woman withdrew her yellow cloth puppet before moving on to a different topic. "Back when I last met you, you had only just reached the body integration stage. Yet in just a few centuries, you've progressed to the late body integration stage. This rate of progression is almost unheard of. If it weren't for this devilish tribulation, the Holy Island would have most likely invited you to join them already. I've heard that the Holy Island has the purest spirit veins in our human and demon territories, and that countless precious ingredients and medicines are planted on the island. It would indeed benefit me immensely if I could join the island," Han Li replied. The woman paused momentarily before asking, "Brother Han, did you know that the Holy Island itself is half of a profound heavenly treasure, and is the last resort for our two races to continue our heritage?"